Chapter 1150. The flame giant could no longer maintain his relaxed state in the face of such a violent tribulation. His power was constantly converted into the power of the light barrier to defend against the terrifying attacks of the technological creations. Although the power of these technological creations was much weaker than that of ordinary technological creations, their power was still considerable. It was extremely difficult for the flame giant to defend against them in his current state. Every attack would cause the clear light barrier to tremble. He had to pour out his power in a frenzy to be able to defend against the attacks of the technological creations. This process was truly excruciating. However, given the flame giant's understanding of the cultivation civilization, he could only use this method to forcefully endure the attacks. He could not use various methods to defend against the tribulations like the god. Fortunately, the flame giant had a lot of energy, far surpassing the limits of an ordinary itinerant immortal. Therefore, although the attacks were painful, he still managed to defend against them. 9 days later, when the last wave of lightning condensed into hundreds of universe obliteration cannons and launched their final attack, the flame giant roared. All the energy in his body surged out frantically and poured into the clear light barrier around him. After receiving such a huge amount of energy, the light barrier expanded rapidly. Countless strange spikes appeared on it, making it look like a hedgehog. It stood upright and faced the light from the countless universe obliteration cannons. The effect of these spikes was rather strange. It directly treated the originally formless and intangible heat energy as a tangible existence. Like a silk thread, it blocked a large amount of the heat energy outside the light shield, reducing the heat energy that hit the light shield to a few 10,000th of its original strength. Although just a few 10,000th of the heat was enough to make the light barrier suffer a tremendous impact and almost collapse, it did not collapse in the end. In the end, it was the flame giant that blocked the last attack. After the last wave of attacks, the thunderclouds above gradually dissipated. Not long after, the scene 9 days ago before the tribulation clouds appeared was restored. Even the space-time that had become chaotic due to the attacks from the tribulation clouds had now returned to normal. It was impossible to tell how many times the space-time in the 9 heavens had collapsed and been reborn. When everything had calmed down, the flame giant prostrated towards Luofan. "Thank you, immortal elder, for your grace of rebirth." To the flame giant, Luofan's grace of giving him a new lease of life wasn't just empty words. Instead, it was real. Without Luofan's help, it would have been impossible for it to possess a soul, let alone become a cultivator. It could only be called a technological creation. Although the intelligence he possessed was miraculous, it was only intelligence after all. It was like a rootless duckweed, and there was a qualitative difference between it and the present. Luofan smiled when he saw the flame giant's reaction. "Why do you need to thank me? This was your initial request, and I only imparted it to you because I found it interesting. No matter what, immortal elder gave me life. This is a great kindness, I have to repay it. I'm willing to follow you for the rest of my life and serve you to repay your kindness," the flame giant said resolutely. "Why do I need you to serve me?" Luofan shook his head. "Since you've already cultivated to become a living being, you don't need to stay by my side anymore. You can leave now. Whatever you want to do in the future, even if it's to be my enemy, do as you please." This caused the flame giant's expression to change drastically. "Don't worry, immortal elder. Even if I die, I won't be your enemy. I have nowhere to go now. I hope immortal elder will take pity on me and take me in. No matter what you want me to do, I'm willing." Luofan just shook his head and said, "Nowhere to go? Then find a place for yourself to go. I'm already making an exception by imparting you the technique. Why would I care where you go?" As he spoke, he couldn't be bothered with the flame giant anymore. He took a step forward, and his figure disappeared from the flame giant's sight. Although the flame giant had already passed the tribulation, coupled with the terrifying energy it possessed, its strength was more than a level higher than before. Based on energy alone, it wasn't much weaker than the universe obliteration cannon. However, how could it compare to Luo Fan? If Luo Fan wanted to avoid being discovered, even if Luo Fan stood right in front of him, the flame giant wouldn't be able to detect him. Now that Luo Fan had turned around and left, he had already gone many light years away in the blink of an eye. How could the flame giant discover him? For a moment it was as if the flame giant was the only one left in the entire universe. A feeling of loss and helplessness arose in its heart. Immortal Elder! Immortal Elder! The flame giant instinctively began to call out loudly. Unfortunately, its words didn't travel too far. It didn't even hear an echo. How could there be an echo? So, you really found it interesting, so you imparted the technique to me. After shouting for a long time, the flame giant finally knew that there would be no reply. It stopped helplessly, and this thought flashed through its mind. Where should I go now? After knowing that there was no turning back, the flame giant felt an indescribable sense of loss in its heart. Previously, he told Luo Fan that he had nowhere to go. Although some of it was to make Luo Fan accept him as his follower, a large part of it was his true feelings. Although the entire universe was huge, and although there were countless planets with life, and there were endless exciting places to go to, the universe was still vast. However, for the flame giant that had turned into a cultivator, there was no place for it to go. In the entire universe, he and Luo Fan were the only two living beings who walked the path of self-evolution. That kind of loneliness and bewilderment was unimaginable unless one personally came to this place. Return to the Guotuan county that created me? No, if I go back there now, it will only make them suspect how I escaped from the immortal. They will definitely investigate the fact that I am now a cultivator. What would happen then? Breaking off all relations with Guotuan County isn't a good choice at all, the flame giant pondered. Follow the path of the immortal? That was even more unacceptable. If a mortal elder thinks I'm annoying, he casually squeezed me, and I died. After thinking for a while, the flame giant suddenly slapped his head and shouted, "Screw it! Since the entire universe only has me and the immortal elder, then I will create more cultivators. I will create a cultivation civilization in this universe. That way, I won't be lonely anymore, and I won't have nowhere to go." This flame giant was merely the most advanced technological creation in a small county like Guotuan County. Not to mention the Kingdom of God, which had the highest level of technology. Even the people from the middle-level and low-level countries were far behind. Under such circumstances, he didn't know that the universe itself was rejecting cultivators. He didn't know that the tribulation from before was not a normal cultivator's tribulation, but the universe's strangulation of cultivators. That was why he had such a grand ambition. He wanted to go against the laws of the universe and create a cultivation civilization. No matter what, the flame giant was the most advanced technology in a county. Even if it was not as advanced as the heavenly gods, it was still quite extraordinary. Its ability to act was needless to say. After making his grand ambition, he started to search for planets nearby that could be used to create a cultivation civilization. It took him 3 to 4 years. After traveling through hundreds of galaxies, he finally gave up on the idea of finding life-bearing planets to create a cultivation civilization. Even though this place was still very far from the center of the universe, it was no longer at the edge of the universe like Guotuan County, where he was born. The life-bearing planets here, even if they did not belong to the higher-level countries, they must have had many interactions with the higher-level countries. If he wanted to guide such a life-bearing planet to become a cultivation civilization, that was definitely a mosquito that stopped between two palms. He was really tired of living. Thus, after 3 to 4 years, the flame giant sighed and decided to go as far away from the center of the universe as possible to find life-bearing planets to create a cultivation civilization. Even though Guotuan County was extremely far from here, it was at least hundreds of billions of light-years away. Normally, the flame giant would not be able to find a way back from such a great distance. However, he was originally a technological creation, and it was much easier and more convenient for him to integrate into those life-bearing planets than Luofan. Therefore, it was very easy for him to find out about the structure of the universe and the location of Guotuan County. He also knew which direction he should go to reach the edge of the universe. Therefore, after making up his mind, he immediately changed his direction. Instead of using the flying method that he obtained after becoming a cultivator, he directly used the flying ability that he obtained when he was a technological creation to head toward the edge of the universe. Compared to the flying method he obtained after becoming a cultivator, using the flying ability created by a technological civilization was much slower. Even if he flew at full speed, it would still take him over 100 years to reach the edge of the universe. It was at least half as slow as using the flying method of a cultivator. However, there was an advantage to doing this. Even if some countries detected his existence, they would not think of him as a cultivator. They would only think that he was a technological creation sent by a higher-level country to explore the universe. It was easy to imagine how great the benefits to his safety would be. During the 100 years of flight, the flame giant was detected hundreds of times by the countries along the way. However, as he was heading toward the center of the universe, he was very lucky that none of the countries tried to stop him. He successfully passed through many countries and arrived at the edge of the universe, the star sector that did not have any countries at all. When the flame giant finally arrived, his eyes were filled with tears of joy. He felt as if he was a bird flying in the sky and a fish swimming in the ocean. He directly roared into the sky, and only stopped after a long time. The flame giant stood in the air and could not help but mutter, "I'm finally here. I no longer have to worry about being detected by the countries around us, and I no longer have to worry about being captured for experiments. This is great." He raised his head and looked toward the center of the universe, and he made up his mind. "I'll never step into that place again. Even if you kill me, I'm a heavenly god. How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" The flame giant's face was filled with determination. Just as he was about to make up his mind, a voice entered his ears. The flame giant was shocked. His body suddenly trembled, and he turned his head to look. He didn't know when, but there was a man in a long robe, with long hair, and an ethereal aura floating in the air 3 feet away from him, looking at him with a smile on his face. The person who just spoke was obviously this person. "You're a cultivator?" The flame giant was dumbfounded. "Of course." The heavenly god chuckled. "I've been a cultivator for more than 100 years, and I've finally met a fellow cultivator. What a pleasant surprise. How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" This person was none other than the heavenly god from the heavenly god's country, the heavenly god that Luo Fan taught him how to cultivate. The flame giant had been flying for 100 years. He flew from the region near the center of the universe all the way to the desolate region of the universe. Before he knew it, he had arrived at the region where the heavenly god lived in seclusion, and was discovered by the heavenly god. After 100 years of cultivation, the heavenly god's cultivation was no longer that of an itinerant immortal when he had just passed the terrifying tribulations. He had unknowingly grown to the great innate realm of the great Luo. It was this profound realm that allowed him to discover the existence of the flame giant so easily. It was this profound realm that allowed him to discover the flame giant's existence so easily, as well as the nature of the flame giant. It was also this profound realm that allowed him to directly appear next to the flame giant. If it weren't for his profound realm, the flame giant wouldn't have been able to discover his existence so easily. Even though the flame giant had entered this region, it was still several light years away from the planet with life where the heavenly god lived in seclusion. How could the flame giant have arrived next to the heavenly god so quickly? The flame giant was tongue-tied by the heavenly god's question. Although he had existed for a long time and had been a true living being for 100 years, he had never had a name. However, he had never had a name. Now that the heavenly god asked him this question, he was momentarily stunned. The heavenly god looked at the flame giant strangely, but he didn't think too much about it. He quietly waited for the flame giant to answer his question. As the second cultivator he had met in this universe, he naturally had a good impression of the flame giant, so he naturally had a lot of patience with the flame giant. What was the big deal about waiting for a little time for the flame giant to think things through? My name is Flaming Flame. Greetings, Taoist friend. The flame giant thought for a while, and finally gave himself this name. So it's Taoist friend Flaming Flame. Nice to meet you. You and I are both cultivators, and it's really fate that we met this time. Why don't you come with me to my cave abode and have a seat? The heavenly god laughed. The heavenly god was very curious about the flame giant's appearance, and the flame giant was also very curious about the second cultivator he had met. Hearing the heavenly god say this, although he was nervous and hesitant, he couldn't resist his curiosity and agreed. When Flaming Flame agreed, the heavenly god was overjoyed. He apologized and took him with one hand. Under the effect of some kind of traction, he directly traveled through time and space and arrived on a planet with life. This planet with life was not the same as the planet with life that the heavenly god had lived in seclusion 100 years ago. Although the technological level of that planet had not broken through the planet's limits and had not stepped into the level of an interstellar civilization, it had still developed a considerable amount of technology. However, after all, it had developed a considerable amount of technology. There were all kinds of sites, and they were all very modern. On the surface, compared to a planet with an extremely advanced technological civilization, there was only a difference in level. However, the situation on this planet was completely different. Right now, this planet with life was like a primitive planet. The intelligent life on this planet was still in the wild and primitive Stone Age. The level of civilization on the entire planet was even thousands of years lower than that of Earth before Luo Fan had traveled through time and space. How could there be such a primitive planet? After all, Flaming Flame was not very knowledgeable. When she sensed the situation on this planet, she could not help but be surprised. This planet still had a low-level technological civilization that was about to step out of the planet tens of thousands of years ago. However, at the critical moment when they were about to enter a stage of rapid development, they broke out in a war that affected the entire planet, and all the creatures on the planet were completely wiped out. This primitive civilization is just developing again in the past tens of thousands of years, the heavenly god explained with a smile. It's really a pity. They actually had a war at that time and destroyed themselves. If they had been able to cross this threshold and break out of the planet and enter the interstellar era, they would have entered a new level. They would not have to worry about resources for tens of millions of years. What a pity, Flaming Flame sighed. That's right. They were just a little short. The heavenly god laughed. The heavenly god had built a cave abode on this planet with life. This cave abode looked very simple, and there were no traces of technology in it. It was completely man-made. While they were talking, the heavenly god had already stopped outside the cave abode with Flaming Flame. Although this cave abode looked simple, the moment Flaming Flame saw it, she was stunned. Her eyes became empty, and her whole body stood there in a daze, unable to move. This was not because the cave abode built by the heavenly god had the ability to hurt people. Instead, every detail of this cave abode contained an indescribable cultivation principle. These cultivation principles made Flaming Flame involuntarily immerse herself in them. She felt the power in her body become extremely active, and she felt that her soul had never been so close to the supreme source of cultivation. Chapter 1151. In Yanhua's eyes, the cave abode in front of him was clearly displaying the cultivation principles that he had vaguely sensed in the past to him without holding back. It directly pushed his cultivation realm to a higher level. After a while, Yanhua came back to his senses. He found that his cultivation realm had increased by one level compared to before. He was only a thin barrier away from the perfected immortal realm. He couldn't help but be surprised and happy. He was surprised that the second cultivator he had met was so powerful. Just this cave abode alone was enough to shock him so much. If this person had the slightest bit of malice towards him, he would definitely be doomed. But what he was happy about was that his cultivation level had improved to such an extent. It should be known that in the past 100 years, although he had been constantly on the road, he had not given up on cultivation. However, his cultivation realm seemed to have been fixed in place. No matter how hard he tried, he could not feel any improvement. At this moment, in just a few breaths, he found that his cultivation realm had increased by more than 10 times. How could he not be happy? Do you think my cave abode is not bad? The heaven god said with a smile. It's not just not bad, it's simply a holy land for cultivation. Yanhua could only exclaim. Haha, I don't deserve to be called a holy land for cultivation. This is just some of the things I have gained from cultivation. You are the second cultivator I have seen in my life. I am really happy that you have gained something, the heaven god said with a smile. I see that you have always said that I am the second cultivator you have seen. I wonder where the first cultivator is now? I won't hide it from you. You are also the second cultivator I have seen in my life. Yanhua looked at the heaven god expectantly and said. He was alone in the universe and could not find anyone of his kind. He could not find anyone who could truly communicate with him. This feeling was unbearable. In the past 100 years, Yanhua had enjoyed enough. Although he had found someone of his kind in front of him, it was only one. Wouldn't it be better if there were more? Ha! Great minds think alike. I am also very interested in the cultivators you have seen before. The heaven god was overjoyed. Like Yanhua, the heaven god also looked forward to meeting his own kind. Although he had improved very quickly in the past few years, and he also had such a huge river system in his body, it was impossible for him to control it. With such a large population. But none of them were his own kind. It was just a part of him. His own loneliness and the feeling of being one of the only 2 cultivators in the universe could not be dispelled because of his situation. It was precisely because of this feeling. That was why he had gone to Yanhua the moment he had discovered him and invited him to his cave abode as a guest. With this mentality, he was also interested in the first cultivator Yanhua had seen. Clearly, the 2 of them hit it off well. After some communication, the 2 of them sat there in a daze, looking at each other. If that's the case, maybe we're from the same sect? Yanhua asked blankly. Fellow disciples? We'll have to wait for the immortal to admit that we're his disciples before we can call him that, said the heavenly god helplessly. After the previous exchange, the 2 of them found out that the first cultivator they saw was actually the same cultivator. The 2 of them did not know whether to laugh or cry. Their hearts were both a little surprised and a little disappointed. They were pleasantly surprised because their relationship had become closer. However, they were disappointed because there were no other cultivators in the universe other than the ones they had seen. They were still quite lonely. I think we can be considered fellow disciples. The immortal doesn't accept us as disciples, so we're not considered fellow disciples at most. Our roots come from the same place, so it's not wrong to consider us fellow disciples, Yanhua said. The heavenly god nodded. The 2 of them fell silent for a while. After a while, the heavenly god's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said, I've decided. Let's follow the immortal's route to the center of the universe. Huh! Yanhua almost jumped up. He had previously sworn never to go near the center of the universe, and now the heavenly God was suggesting that they go to the center of the universe. This was directly asking him to go back on his word. How could he not be surprised? No, 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 I'm not going. That's too dangerous. We're cultivators now. If we're discovered by those high-level countries, we'll definitely die without a burial place. It's good to be studied, but it'll be a waste if we're killed directly. Yanhua could not help but shake his head. Discovered by high-level countries? The heavenly God's expression could not help but become a little strange. After thinking about it, he smiled slightly, said sorry for the offense, and raised his hand to cover Yanhua. In an instant, an indescribable force enveloped Yanhua and suddenly pulled him into the inside of his body. He entered the river system inside the heavenly God's body and appeared in an extremely vast starry sky. Yanhua could not help but shake his head. Suddenly, he realized that the fellow disciple in front of him had suddenly said, "Sorry for the offense," and then raised his hand to point at him. He was a little shocked when he arrived, thinking that this person was going to kill him. Suddenly, he found that the world had changed, and he had arrived in a whole new world. He could not help but be stunned for a moment. "This is the inside of my body." While he was in a daze, a voice came from beside him. He turned his head and saw that the heavenly God had appeared beside him. However, the heavenly God now looked a little blurry and illusory, as if it was only an illusory body and not a real body. Seeing this, he heaved a sigh of relief. Although he did not know what was going on, at least he could be sure that this fellow disciple did not have any intention of attacking him. After he heaved a sigh of relief, he then noticed the content of the heavenly God's words. "What? This is inside your body? How can there be such a universe in your body?" He cried out in surprise. "To be precise, this is a river system. Or rather, a country," the heavenly God said with a smile. "High-level countries?" Hearing this, Yanhua was even more shocked. After all, he was essentially a product of technological creation. Although his knowledge was far less than that of the highest technological creation of a high-level or medium-sized country, he still had some concept. He had a clear understanding of the concept of a galaxy being a country. "How can there be a high-level country in your body?" Yanhua said in shock. "This country is me. Haven't you heard of my name?" The heavenly God said. "You are called the heavenly God. Are you that high-level country, the heavenly God country? How can a country become a cultivator?" Yanhua shouted. "The truth is right in front of you. Do you still need me to explain?" The heavenly God said calmly. Yanhua looked at the river system in front of her, then at the heavenly God beside her. Finally, she was speechless. After a long time, Yanhua said, "Since you are a high-level country, why are you staying at the edge of the universe? With your strength, as long as you don't encounter a super country, you can basically do whatever you want in this universe. I became a cultivator to come into contact with the absolute truth, not to do whatever I want in the universe. If I stay near the center of the universe, I'm afraid I can only run for my life. Every second of every day, he was fighting. How would I have time to study the absolute truth then?" The heavenly God said matter-of-factly. "How about it? Now, are you willing to go to the center of the universe with me?" The heavenly God said. "Since you are a high-level country, I can guarantee my safety when I go to the center of the universe with you. However, why do we have to follow the path of the immortal and go to the center of the universe?" Yanhua struggled to find a reason. This was indeed his doubt. As a high-level country, the heavenly God only needed to create an aircraft that could only be owned by a high-level country. Naturally, he could disguise himself as a product of a technological civilization and hide the fact that he was a cultivator. There was no need for him to personally go into battle like he did. However, he did not know why he had to do this. Although it was relatively safe, he was still doing something that seemed useless. Have you forgotten how you and I became cultivators? The heavenly god said. I know. I am also extremely grateful to the immortal. I dare not forget for even a moment, Yen Hua said, a little confused. I mean, do you really think that the two of us are the only two cultivators that the immortal has enlightened? Will the immortal not enlighten more cultivators on the long journey to the center of the universe? The heavenly god felt very helpless with Yen Hua's slow response, so he could only explain things clearly. These words made Yen Hua's eyes suddenly light up. The flames around his body began to rise, making him a man of fire. One could imagine how excited he was. Go. Leave immediately. Not only do we have to follow the immortal's route, but we also have to go as fast as possible. Yen Hua shouted. Seeing this, the heavenly god was finally satisfied. He raised his hand and brought Yen Hua with him. In a flash, he had already appeared in the outside world. Then, he raised his hand and inserted it into his chest. He rummaged around inside his body a few times and pulled out a 4-foot-long sword. He then threw it into space outside the planet. After the long sword reached space, it expanded crazily. In the blink of an eye, it reached the level of the moon. Such a huge and heavy long sword appeared in this solar system. It almost affected the solar system's gravitational system. Yen Hua looked up at the long sword and knew that it was a very strange-shaped spaceship. His eyes were instantly filled with shock. Is this the technological level of a high-level country? It's so beautiful, he muttered. Even though he was already a cultivator, he was still a product of a technological civilization. As the saying went, it was easier to change a leopard's spots than a leopard's spots. He still had a special feeling for technological product. The moment he saw the universe ship, he immediately used the logic of technology to analyze the universe ship. With this analysis, he was completely immersed in it. He was shocked by the level of technology it contained. He felt that his view of technology had been completely overturned. Is this really the level that a technological civilization can reach? This spaceship is almost like a world inside. It's at least 100 million times more advanced than me. Could it be that the technological civilization of a high-level country can reach this level? Then what about a super country? Yen Hua's eyes were filled with shock. Countless complicated thoughts surged in his mind. This spaceship looked like a long sword. This shape was too common in the universe. No one would think that it was a cultivator. And on this long sword, the densely packed lines looked like they were made up of pieces of mechanical parts. Within this long sword, there was a sense of space and time. It was as if there was an infinite space and time compressed inside. This spaceship was formed after I came into contact with the absolute truth. I upgraded the spaceships of the nation of God according to the truth. It's not something that a high-level country's technology can achieve. I even suspect that the super country's technology might not be able to reach this level. Cammy listened to Yen Hua's sigh and laugh. The reason he became a cultivator was to come into contact with the absolute truth, which was the Tao. Therefore, after coming into contact with it, he would naturally transform the result of his contact into a technological product. The one in front of him. This was the product that had appeared. Let's go. Cammy saw that Yen Hua didn't react at all. He knew that Yen Hua didn't listen to his words. He didn't say anything else. He lifted his hand and pulled Yen Hua. His body had already crossed a long distance. He directly entered the spaceship. Entering this spaceship, it was indeed a vast world. The entire world even had a relatively complete energy cycle, except that it couldn't generate its own energy. Everything here was not much different from the real universe. Yen Hua saw that it was such a wonderful place. He immediately left Cammy behind and began to explore the spaceship. After a full 10 days, he finally returned to where Cammy was. He said to Cammy, "This thing, give me one." "Sure. Whenever you want it, I can give it to you anytime." Cammy laughed. "That's great." At this moment, Yanhua finally felt how lucky he was to have such a fellow sect member. A few years later, in a star field, a spaceship that looked like a long sword was traversing through the universe. Suddenly, a loud roar resounded in the universe. An ape-like beast suddenly appeared in the universe and directly pounced towards the spaceship. Looking at its crazy posture, it seemed like it wanted to perish together with the long sword. At this moment, the spaceship shook slightly. A destructive light shot out from the long sword and pierced through the incomparably large, ape-like beast. After being hit by this light, the entire body shook and instantly split into countless small pieces, becoming countless tiny pieces of flesh that disappeared without a trace. How many is this? Why is it that the closer we get to the center of the universe, the more of these things there are? In the spaceship, a man wrapped in flames said helplessly. Beside this man, a man wearing a Taoist robe said, "It's the 373rd. This is the 373rd beast we've encountered. Its strength ranks around 89th among all the beasts. It's not too high but not too low either." These two people were obviously Yanhua and Cammy, who were following Luo Fan's route. "Hey, can't you give me some reaction? This isn't what I want," Yanhua said helplessly. "What do you want me to say?" "You know what I know, and I don't know what you don't know," Cammy said helplessly. "Then can't you make a guess? You have the population of a high-level country in your body. There must be someone who can guess the truth," Yanhua said with disdain. "Their guess? That's too many. I remember there are more than 300 million possibilities. Which one do you want to hear?" Cammy glanced at Yanhua and said, "The most likely one," Yanhua said. At this moment they were already billions of light years away from where they had started. The spaceship they were piloting had traveled tens of millions of light years. During this process, when the two of them passed through the place where Yanhua had been, they realized that the universe seemed to have changed somehow. This change could not be described with words, and the two of them had no idea what it was. They only knew that after this change, there were many things in the universe that they could not understand, or in other words, things that could not be explained by technology. The giant beast that had pounced at them just now was one of them. Over the years, they had encountered many types of giant beasts, and their numbers were quite large. These giant hands had different strengths, and some of the stronger giant hands even made the two of them feel like they were Luo Fan. They had almost torn their spaceship apart. As for the weaker ones, they were not even as strong as Yanhua. They did not even need to do anything. As long as the spaceship crashed into them, they would be destroyed. Apart from these abnormal regions that were different from the outside universe, as well as the life forms that they encountered that were different from the original normal technological civilization of the universe, the cultivators that Luo Fan had enlightened and their fellow disciples that they had originally wanted to find were nowhere to be found. From the looks of it, it was as if Luo Fan had stopped the process of transforming the universe's intelligence into a cultivator. "You've heard that reason more than 10 times. Do you still want to hear it?" Cammy said calmly. "Is it still the same reason? The current situation is very different from when that possibility first appeared. Could it be that the most likely reason still hasn't changed?" Fireworks yelled. "It hasn't changed. It's still a superpower that has gone crazy and used the power of the entire country to distort the rules of the universe." "This is the most likely reason," Cammy said. "How could this happen? The nature of those superpowers has been raised to a level that is compatible with the universe. All of their citizens have great wisdom. How could they have gone crazy? This reason is ridiculous no matter how you look at it. How could it be the most likely reason?" Yanhua said disdainfully. Chapter 1152. Just as Yanhua was about to say something, suddenly, God Cammy raised his hand and said, "Wait, there seems to be something." Hearing this, Yanhua stopped and carefully observed the image of the spaceship. It was a screen that was suspended in front of him, and it showed the boundless universe outside the spaceship. Where is it? I don't see it. Yanhua looked carefully for a while and realized that the situation outside was no different from how it had been for a few years, so he said anxiously, "Look over there," God Kami said as he pointed at a spot on the screen. Yanhua carefully observed the spot he was pointing at. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he said, "There's something wrong there. It's as if there's an invisible thing flying at high speed. Could it be a detection artifact from a great nation?" God Kami shook his head and said, "That's definitely not a detection artifact from a great nation. Although a great nation is powerful, I'm confident that the detection ability of this spaceship is not inferior to that of a great nation's creation. Something that can hide from the spaceship's detection for so long and allow me to only discover it now is definitely not that kind of thing. Could it be a cultivator's creation?" Yanhua was overjoyed. "Then what are we waiting for? Hurry up and take a look at it." God Kami nodded and raised his hand to do something. His spaceship, which looked like a long sword, suddenly shot out a beam of light toward the strange spot. The beam of light kept changing in midair. When it reached that spot, it turned into a palm. It was an incomparably huge palm that covered the sky and covered the earth. Even the palm lines on it could be seen clearly. It was a clear white palm. As soon as the palm appeared, it suddenly squeezed down on the space in that location. The power of this squeeze was truly earth-shattering. The space and time in that area instantly froze under this pinch, revealing what seemed to be a translucent crystal. This was clearly a squeeze. As a result, a certain function of the spacetime modifier was created. It directly transformed that area of spacetime into a crystal wall, causing that area of spacetime to instantly become extremely stable. It could even withstand the explosion of the universe obliteration cannon. And in this crystal wall, a figure that seemed somewhat illusory yet also very real appeared. It was a human figure. One of them was less than 3 meters tall and looked like a young woman. It was as if they were just any ordinary human silhouettes that existed on any life planet. However, this figure was currently wrapped in a strange light that was a strange existence. The light itself was an invisible existence. This invisible and intangible existence also made her body invisible and intangible at the same time, thus breaking away from the detection limits of all technological creations. However, in this crystal wall, this kind of radiance clearly manifested some kind of substance. Under this substance, that figure looked like he was wrapped in a transparent jelly, appearing extremely strange. The figure's face was filled with shock, and there seemed to be a deep and unfathomable light flashing in his eyes. There seemed to be many signs of devouring in his eyes. She struggled frantically in the crystal wall. However, this struggle was limited to the jelly. In other words, all of her struggles could only change the internal composition of the jelly. She could not affect the outside of the jelly, nor could she shake the surrounding crystal walls. As the huge palm lifted, the crystal wall was like an ice ball that had been pulled out of the water. It was easily pulled out, and its connection with the surrounding space and time was completely cut off in an instant. Then, the huge palm shrank and brought the crystal wall back into the spaceship. With the crystal wall, it appeared in front of Sky God and Yanhua. The entire process lasted for an extremely short period of time, almost only a split second. At this moment, the echo of Yanhua's last word had not even disappeared. She should be a cultivator. I just don't know if she's from the same sect. Yanhua looked at the female figure in the crystal wall, and her eyes flashed with anticipation and anxiety. Why don't we just ask and find out? Sky God laughed. At this moment, he was also quite happy. After wandering in the universe for so many years and encountering hundreds of difficult battles, he could finally make real progress. How could he not be happy? As he spoke, he casually patted the space in front of him. In an instant, the crystal wall completely collapsed, and the figure disappeared completely. Just like in the beginning, it melted into the void and became undetectable. Obviously, the figure had only appeared because the time and space had turned into the crystal wall, and an inexplicable change had occurred. Now that the crystal wall had disappeared, the invisible and intangible light was activated again. It naturally activated the invisible and intangible power, and it directly hid the figure. Since Sky God dared to destroy the crystal wall, he naturally had a way to deal with it. With a thought, the space inside the spaceship changed naturally. A beam of white light shone out from every corner of the space, illuminating every inch of the void in this space. Under the illumination of this light, the figure of the figure reappeared. This time, it did not even illuminate the invisible and intangible light around the figure. Instead, it directly illuminated the figure of the woman. How could this be? How could the technique that I created be so easily broken? The woman looked at Sky God and Yen Hua, who had their eyes locked on her. Her face was full of disbelief as she muttered to herself. "Fellow cultivator, you're also a cultivator, right?" The Empyrean looked at this woman, completely ignoring her muttering, and directly said such a sentence. "Ah!" The woman's expression changed drastically. She raised her hand and punched at Sky God. At this moment, the Empyrean suddenly felt an unimaginable power coming towards him from the front. The power was secondary. What he cared about was the nature of this power. As soon as this power appeared, it produced an unimaginable suction force that pulled at Sky God and Yen Hua wildly. Under this suction force, even the light in the entire space was attracted to this power, causing absolute darkness to form around this power. The outline of a black fist appeared and blasted towards Sky God. "This is a black hole? Black hole?" The heavenly god was shocked and couldn't help but exclaim. Generally speaking, this kind of suction force that could even absorb light could only appear in a black hole. Although the black hole wasn't much of a threat to ordinary countries, it wasn't much of a threat. Only a true superpower would be able to use a black hole like a household appliance. In this kind of situation, the punch that the person in front of him had unleashed actually contained the characteristics of a black hole. How could Sky God not let his imagination run wild? However, even though he was imagining things, Sky God's reaction was still quite fast. He raised his hand and slapped towards the power. A palm that was 3 meters in size slashed across the void and collided with the power that contained the characteristics of a black hole. The two were instantly annihilated at the same time, creating a strong shock wave that scattered in all directions, causing the entire space to be in chaos. "Stop! We're cultivators too!" Yen Hua hurriedly shouted from the side. The punch that this person had unleashed just now was aimed at Sky God, not at him. This gave him time to react, and at this moment, he opened his mouth and said the most crucial sentence. At this moment, the woman was about to unleash a second punch. She had even prepared her posture and was just short of directly blasting it out. When she suddenly heard this sentence, her eyes lit up. She maintained her posture and did not move, a hesitant expression appearing on her face. At this moment, Sky God also knew the crux of the problem and could not help but sigh. From this, he could already tell how much psychological pressure this person in front of him had endured, and how difficult it had been all these years. After sighing, he slowly released his restrained aura. In an instant, the entire space was enveloped by a kind of perfect, free, and carefree aura. One could faintly hear the faint sound of thunder coming from the void. This perfect, free, and carefree aura was the aura that a connate Grand Luo cultivator possessed. And the faint sound of thunder coming from the void was a manifestation of this universe's rejection and suppression of this connate Grand Luo aura. If this was in other universes, there would never be such a sound. In some special universes, there might even be celestial sounds and the appearance of heavenly flowers and golden lotuses. This situation finally allowed the woman to completely confirm that these two people in front of her were really cultivators like her. For a moment, the rims of her eyes were slightly red, and they seemed to be faintly moist. Her body relaxed, and she bowed to the two of them. She said, "Shirkong greets the two of you. I've offended you just now, please forgive me." Hearing this, the sky god and Yen Hua heaved a sigh of relief. If they could not reason it out, it would be a bit troublesome. Now that they had made things clear, things would be easier to handle. The sky god slowly withdrew his aura and said with a smile, "We also went through this stage, and we understand your mentality. Why would we blame you? I'm sky god, greet you. I'm Yen Hua, greet you." Yen Hua also returned the greeting. After the misunderstanding was cleared, the three of them sat down. After sitting down, Shirkong said, "I thought there were only two cultivators in this universe. It's really a pleasant surprise to be able to meet the two of you today." Hearing this, the sky god and Yen Hua could not help but feel helpless and happy. This was because these words were very familiar to them. The two of them had almost said the same thing. Shirkong could not help but be surprised when she saw the strange expressions on their faces. She did not think there was anything wrong with what they said. It could not be that the two of them thought that she was ignorant and embarrassed, right? Thinking of this, she could not help but feel a little nervous. However, after all, she was not an ordinary person. Although she was worried, she still asked, "Fellow cultivators, why are you acting like this? We are being rude. The reason why we are acting like this is because the two of us have said the same thing when we first met." The sky god sighed. This finally made Shirkong curious, and she quickly asked for the reason. After the sky god and Yen Hua told her the reason, Shirkong's mouth opened wide. Her face could not help but show the same expression as the sky god and Yen Hua before. "May I know who the cultivator that you saw before was?" The sky god looked at Shirkong's expression and was almost certain that she was also enlightened by the immortal that had enlightened him. "I think that great immortal should be the immortal that fellow Taoist sky god and the immortal that fellow Taoist Yen Hua spoke of." Shirkong sighed. The sky god and Yen Hua could not help but look at each other helplessly and happily. After a while, Yen Hua finally sighed, "I didn't expect us to be from the same sect. May I know how fellow Taoist Shirkong was enlightened by the immortal?" "My original body was the guardian of a river system branch of the superpower Eternal Kingdom. It was a technological creation that Eternal Kingdom transformed from a black hole. Nearly 100 years ago, when I was sleeping in the center of the river system branch, suddenly, Shirkong naturally did not hold back the entire process of being enlightened. Shirkong's essence was a black hole. It was just that this black hole had been captured by Eternal Kingdom countless years ago and transformed into a biological weapon. It became an individual similar to the Sky God and was sent to guard a river system branch of Eternal Kingdom. The territory of Eternal Kingdom itself encompassed tens of thousands of river systems. Every single one of them. It was a river system branch. Its power was even greater than that of a superpower. At least, the province that Shirkong was guarding was stronger than the kingdom of God. Moreover, it was not the kind of power that was 1 or 2 times stronger, but the kind that was 10 times or even 100 times stronger. As the guardian of such a galaxy, Shirkong would usually sleep in the center of the province, absorbing the power of the universe bit by bit like a black hole. It maintained the gravitational system of the entire galaxy from collapsing and stabilized the entire galaxy's gravitational system for a long time. One day more than 100 years ago, when Shirkong was sleeping in the center of the galaxy, she suddenly felt a very strange fluctuation in the gravitational system of the galaxy she was guarding. It was different from the gravitational waves that were produced when the residents of the sub-province carried out technological experiments or created star fortresses or planetary fortresses over the past hundreds of millions of years. Instead, it was a wave that was stronger and more terrifying than anything she had ever encountered. The gravitational force was so strong. She even felt as if another galaxy had directly collided with the province of her galaxy. Shirkong turned pale with fright when she felt the gravitational wave. She used the detection ability given to her by Eternal Kingdom to scan the entire galaxy and locate the center of the gravitational wave. It was also there that she found a person. One looked very ordinary on the surface. With a casual slap, he destroyed the entire galaxy and condensed it into a small gravitational force. The gravitational force of the entire galaxy was caused by this man's actions. In order to condense the entire galaxy into a small mass of gravitational matter, the power that would erupt would be greater than that of the entire galaxy. The gravitational force was produced by the explosion of such a terrifying power. The instant Shirkong discovered the man also discovered her. When the man turned his head to look in her direction, Shirkong felt like she had become naked. All of her secrets, including everything she had experienced when she was an ordinary black hole, were instantly seen by this man. Due to her accumulated wisdom over a long period of time, she felt an indescribable fear. It produced a shocking destructive desire. Under this destructive desire, she attacked the man without hesitation. In order to destroy this man, she directly exploded dozens of stars and used the power of these stars to destroy the space-time within several light years of the man's location. She completely destroyed all matter and even the deep layer of laws of the universe that technology could detect. Even the most advanced technological products of Eternal Kingdom wouldn't dare to withstand such an attack. Even if they weren't destroyed, they would be severely damaged and might even lose their functions. However, after the destruction completely calmed down a few days later, Shirkong discovered that there was a man with an indifferent expression floating in the region that had turned into nothingness. Even the deep layers of the universe's laws had become chaotic. This man looked exactly the same as he did a few days ago, before the explosion. There was no difference at all. Even his clothes were not damaged at all. Even the creases at the corners of his clothes seemed to be exactly the same as before. Even the most advanced technological products of Eternal Kingdom were severely damaged, but the man couldn't even move his clothes. Seeing this scene, the fear in Shirkong's heart had already reached its peak. Just as she was about to run away, before she could finish her thoughts, and before she could even take any action, she discovered that the man was already standing in front of her. In the blink of an eye, he traversed tens of thousands of light years from the edge of the river system to the center of the river system. He stood calmly in front of her. This kind of attack is very interesting. With the means of a technological civilization, it can completely destroy the rules and laws. It even stirred up the void. If I didn't have stronger means, it might have hurt me. After the man appeared in front of her, he said calmly, This is indeed the tone of an immortal elder." Yenhua's face twitched as she recalled all the things that had happened when she first met Luo Fan. She then interrupted helplessly. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Kneeling for sharing fastest update least mistakes. Chapter 1153. And then? I remember that the immortals wouldn't teach you cultivation methods so easily. I begged for a long time before the immortals reluctantly taught me the method and gave me the opportunity to come into contact with the absolute truth, Kami said from the side. Shirkong's eyes were a little dazed. After a while, he said, after the great immortal said that, he took me apart and turned me into countless tiny pieces. After studying them for a few days, he left me to fend for myself. He didn't even want to reassemble them and planned to leave. At that time, I had the last radiance of a setting sun and called for help. At this point, Shirkong's face was a little red. When they heard Shirkong say that he called for help, Kami and Yenhua looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. You were just a technological creation back then, right? How could you call for help? Kami asked. Yes, as a technological creation, you can't have a sense of self. Even if you have intelligence, it's intelligence without fear. You won't have the fear of death that normal creatures have, so how could you call for help? Yanhua was also very surprised. I don't know either. It's just that at that time, I felt an indescribable fear, so I naturally called out that sentence, Shirkong said. Then, the immortal elder saved you? Yanhua didn't understand and could only continue to ask. At that time, the immortal elder glanced at me indifferently and said that it was very interesting to be able to derive a little spirituality from a mortal body. Then, he casually squeezed me, and I returned from my original fragmented state to a normal state. However, at that time, my connection with the river system subprovince had been completely cut off, and it felt like I was completely independent. Shirkong told Kami and Yanhua what happened after that. Behind them, the extremely terrifying man clicked his tongue in admiration and said that it was interesting. However, that was all. After saying that it was interesting, he leisurely walked away. At this time, Shirkong's heart was blessed. He suddenly knelt down in front of the man and shouted thank you for saving his life. He also begged the man to help him escape the control of a superpower and obtain true freedom. After such a request was made, Kami and Yanhua were surprised. This was not something that a technological creation would say. After saying this, the man seemed to be surprised again. Then he said calmly, "Freedom? This thing is very precious to some people. Not worth a dime to some people. You want freedom. What do you think you have in exchange for that freedom?" Shirkong heard this. As if he had been struck by lightning, he stood there in a daze. Right now, even her own body was casually molded by that man. What else could she have in exchange for freedom? I don't have anything to exchange. Helpless, she could only say this. Since you don't have anything to exchange, why should I give you freedom? The man said. I can give you everything you want except freedom. Shirkong could only say this. Including life? That person said indifferently. Shirkong fell into despair for a moment. Freedom and life, these two existences were interdependent. There was no life. Where would freedom come from? Without freedom, what was the meaning of life? Looking at Shirhao's despairing expression, the man laughed and said, "Not bad, your spirituality is stronger than I imagined. Since you've brought me so much joy, I'll give you your freedom." As he said this, he casually pointed his finger, and Shirkong found that there were now some mysterious characters in his mind. As these words circulated, Shirkong felt a strange change in her body. The power of the black hole began to change, and her spirituality began to grow rapidly. Her cultivation realm also began to gradually increase. After a while, she had advanced from her original state of no cultivation to the itinerant immortal realm, which also triggered the tribulations of the universe. This caused the entire river system to suffer unimaginable damage. Although it did not completely collapse and disappear, it became messy and could no longer maintain its original state as it flew in all directions. This change lasted for 9 days and 9 nights. It was also because of these 9 days and 9 nights, Eternal Kingdom found out about her abnormality. During the tribulations, many powerful technological products were sent to attack Shirkong, who had obviously become a cultivator and was undergoing the universe's heavenly tribulation. Those technological products were at least at Shirkong's level. As they were endless, they caused great pressure on Shirkong. Shirkong was almost completely destroyed by the tribulations, and she was almost consigned to eternal damnation. Not only did she not obtain her freedom, but she also died. At that moment, the man who taught Shirkong the cultivation method attacked. With a wave of his hand, it was as though a world had enveloped the cosmic void within a radius of tens of thousands of light years. The technological products were completely trapped in that world, and the connection between them and Eternal Kingdom was completely cut off. Thus, they stopped attacking Shirkong, allowing Shirkong to survive the tribulation without any mishap. Shere Kong had become a true cultivator and obtained the chance to be free. The kami stood up and said solemnly, "You said that many of the technological products of Eternal Kingdom that attacked you were taken away by the immortals?" "Yes." Shere Kong seemed to know what the kami was talking about. She sighed and nodded. "Then, Eternal Kingdom should have suffered some losses after losing those technological products, right?" The kami asked. "How could it not have suffered any losses? Eternal Kingdom has tens of thousands of river system provinces. There are hundreds of thousands of technological products of the same level as me. Although they are not the highest technological products of Eternal Kingdom, they are still the backbone of the kingdom. When these technological products were taken away by the great immortals, Eternal Kingdom's society experienced a huge upheaval. The entire kingdom has undergone many changes," Shere Kong said. "These changes, what are they?" the kami asked. "Those changes are the highest technological products of Eternal Kingdom. Eternal Kingdom's nature changed because of the fear of the people," Shere Kong said. "Eternal Kingdom? Is Eternal Kingdom not a country's name, but a technological product?" Fireworks was shocked. "That's not strange. I am the highest technological product of the Kingdom of God, so it is not strange for Eternal Kingdom's highest technological products to have this name. However, what I don't understand is the use of Eternal Kingdom itself. What changes happened to its nature?" The kami first explained, then raised another question. Eternal Kingdom's function is like its name. It is an eternal existence, a space that fuses with the universe, or rather, a world. This world can transfer the life imprints of all the dead into the kingdom and reconstruct their bodies. Fusing with the kingdom, they can enjoy the endless life of the universe. The changes that happen to it. It appeared during the process of reconstructing the body of the life imprints, Shere Kong said, looking guilty. "Did it create a lot of monsters in the process?" The kami sighed. "How do you know?" "Oh yes, you must have encountered such monsters before." Shere Kong was shocked at first, then he suddenly realized. "So that's how it is." Fireworks opened her mouth, but no words came out. The kami had told him that the monsters appeared because a superpower had gone mad and used the power of the entire nation to distort the laws of the universe. Now that he had explained it clearly, although it was slightly different from the kami's explanation, it seemed to be the case. It was hard for him to accept it. How is that possible? Then why did the panic of the citizens of Eternal Kingdom cause that world to create monsters? "I don't think it's possible." Fireworks tried to find a reason to convince himself. "Why is it not possible? A superpower is many times more powerful than any advanced nation. It is even fused with the universe, and its laws can become the fundamental laws of the universe. However, the citizens of this nation are just ordinary people. Perhaps because of the power of Eternal Kingdom, they are very different from the ordinary citizens of the advanced nations, but their essence will not change. Since they are only ordinary people, they will naturally be afraid. Naturally they will panic. You may not be able to imagine how shocking the great deity's actions were, but I saw it with my own eyes. The hundreds of thousands of technological products that could destroy the entire galaxy were taken away by a sleeve. Even I felt a sense of despair. Not to mention those ordinary people. When Shere Kong said this, he could not help but shiver. He seemed to recall that shocking scene. As a superpower, Eternal Kingdom took the major event that happened in its territory lightly. The horror of the cultivation civilization was magnified to the extreme in their eyes. Therefore, their mentality. Naturally, they lost their balance. I dare not say that all of them, but at least most of them were dissatisfied with the small amount of power that they controlled. This accumulation of dissatisfaction affected the most advanced technological product, Eternal Kingdom. When Eternal Kingdom bestowed the bodies with life imprints, it absorbed energy from the outside world to create powerful bodies. All of the citizens of Eternal Kingdom had amazing power. It's a pity. Shere Kong shook his head and sighed. It's a pity that power is not easy to control. The more powerful the power that exceeds one's control, the more severe the consequences. The celestial side. This was common knowledge in the cultivation civilization, but in the technological civilization, very few people knew about it. That's right. The bodies created by Eternal Kingdom were unable to control the power. They were devoured by the power and turned into monsters. They broke free from Eternal Kingdom and wreaked havoc in Eternal Kingdom, causing more and more death. The deaths caused the most advanced technological product, Eternal Kingdom, to have more life imprints and create more monsters. This formed an endless cycle, causing more and more monsters. Finally, the order of Eternal Kingdom collapsed, and it became a monster kingdom. Shirkong sighed. A monster kingdom? That's an exaggeration. Fireworks said as though she was comforting herself. It's not an exaggeration. Don't think that just because you haven't encountered many monsters, it's nothing. In fact, this is not Eternal Kingdom. It's millions of stellar systems away from Eternal Kingdom. The monsters here are scattered, unable, or unwilling to live in Eternal Kingdom. You'll be able to see the true horror when you enter Eternal Kingdom, Shirkong said in horror. So that's how it is. Both Flame and God of Heaven took a deep breath. The interior of the spaceship instantly fell into a state of silence. After a long time, Fireworks asked, "Since it has become like this, is there a need for us to continue forward?" The celestial god stood there, his expression changing for a long time. Then, he gritted his teeth and said, "Forward. Of course we have to advance. I want to see what Eternal Kingdom has become. I want to know more. I want to know if the celestial god has enlightened more cultivators to become our fellow cultivators." "You still want to move forward?" Shirkong shouted in surprise when he heard the conversation between the two of them. "Of course. The three of us, together with the celestial god, are all the cultivators in the universe. That way you won't feel lonely. Don't you want to meet more fellow cultivators?" The cultivators are weak in this universe, and they are rejected by the entire universe. If we split up, won't we give others a chance to attack us one by one? The outcome will be tragic," the celestial god said firmly. When Shirkong heard this, he thought of his experiences over the past few days and the terrifying heavenly tribulation he had encountered. He could not help but tremble. He knew that what the celestial god said was true. If he did not do anything, he might be able to live a carefree life for a short period of time. However, in the end, he would definitely die under the rejection of the entire universe. What you said makes sense. However, you don't know how dangerous it is. In this state, it's impossible to get close to Eternal Kingdom, let alone go through it. We will definitely be torn to pieces by those monsters. Shirkong shook his head fiercely. Haha, since we know the situation in front of us, why would we disguise ourselves as the products of a technological civilization? We can disguise ourselves as those monsters. Heavenly God listened. The celestial god could not help but laugh. Disguise ourselves as monsters? Hearing the celestial god's words, both Yen Hua and Shirkong's eyes lit up. They had been blinded by their previous belief. When they thought about moving forward, they thought that they would definitely be attacked by those monsters. They did not think that they could disguise themselves. After being reminded by the celestial god, they reacted one by one. Countless inspirations flashed in their minds. If we disguise ourselves as monsters, it might be dangerous. Now, many nations are encircling the monsters in Eternal Kingdom. If we disguise ourselves as monsters, I'm afraid we will be killed as monsters. I think it's better to add a transformation ability to disguise ourselves. When we encounter monsters, we can disguise ourselves as monsters. When we encounter the killing teams of other nations, we can disguise ourselves as technological product. That way we will be foolproof, Shirkong said, his eyes almost shining. There are teams of other nations killing monsters in Eternal Kingdom? Won't those monsters be killed very quickly? Celestial God said in surprise. How can it be so easy? Speaking of this, Sher Kong felt helpless and said, although there are no lack of superpowers in those nations, there is an endless stream of killing power. However, the technological creation of Eternal Kingdom was constantly working. Once a monster died, it would absorb the life imprint and reconstruct a new body. In a short while, a new monster would be created, whether it was the same or a different one. It's simply endless, and it can't be killed. No matter how the killing teams of those nations kill, it doesn't affect the overall number of monsters, Sher Kong sighed. Then why not just destroy that technological product Eternal Kingdom? Yen Hua said. That's even more impossible. The technological product Eternal Kingdom was originally the most advanced technological product of a superpower. Its defense is not something that can be broken by ordinary forces. In addition, although most of those monsters are muddle-headed and don't have much intelligence, there are some that are fully intelligent. They are constantly guarding the technological product Eternal Kingdom, preventing any damage to it. To destroy that product, even if a few superpowers unite, it is almost impossible. Sher Kong was very familiar with the current situation of Eternal Kingdom, so he sighed and explained. I see. Then it's decided. We will first create a spaceship that can freely change between a monster and a technological product spaceship. Then, we will set off through Eternal Kingdom and follow the path of the immortal to find our fellow cultivators. Celestial God said. Okay, Yen Hua replied loudly. Although Sher Kong did not directly say that he wanted to join, he agreed at this time. In fact, there was no doubt that Sher Kong would join Yen Hua and Celestial God. Based on Sher Kong's way of surviving between Celestial God and Yen Hua, surviving alone was a fate worse than death. The loneliness, the uneasiness, and the sense of crisis were all unbearable for her. In comparison, although joining Empyrean and Flame would mean taking risks that she was unwilling to take for the time being, it was much safer than being alone before, which made her feel much better. It also allowed her to enjoy the beauty of freedom. Since they had reached a consensus, there was nothing else to say. Chapter 1154. At that moment, Luo Fan did not know that behind him, the heavenly gods and the others were following his footprints as they headed towards the center of the universe. Over the past 100 years, his speed wasn't slow, but it wasn't fast either as he flew toward the center of the universe. Along the way, he had passed through dozens of superpowers and hundreds of thousands of advanced countries. During this process, he gained an increasingly deeper understanding of the similarities and differences between scientific and technological civilizations and cultivation civilizations. Among them, there were many creative ideas that amazed him. The higher the technological civilization developed, the more mysterious it became. At the level of advanced civilizations, the development direction of technological civilizations was still traceable to Luo Fan. At least, he could understand these civilizations based on his knowledge of technological civilizations. However, when a scientific and technological civilization developed to the level of a superpower, the development of the situation would undergo a tremendous change. It went from being traceable to being traceable to being traceless. Although the fundamental principle used was still the principle of science and technology, there were countless unimaginably complex changes, and it was completely not something that a technological civilization should have. For example, more than 100 years ago, when he encountered the first superpower, Eternal Kingdom, he encountered a technological creation that was modified from a black hole in one of the galaxies. The technological creation looked like a human and called itself emptiness. It was quite powerful. Although it was not as powerful as the heavenly gods that he had enlightened, it had a special ability developed from the characteristics of a black hole. It could control all gravitational systems and even borrow the power of the gravitational system. It could explode with power that could destroy time, space, and the law of destruction. It could even stir and shake the void layer below the law layer. At that time, when he first encountered that attack, if he had not been vigilant at all times and protected himself with the three-dimensional talisman that was set up with the help of the gray blurry existence, he might have been crushed by that attack. He had been knocked into the unseen world. Apart from that, the life created by the black hole could even have unimaginable spirituality. It knew how to beg for mercy, understand fear, and know how to pursue freedom. This was not something that could be achieved by ordinary technological creations. It was already close to the means of the cultivation civilization. It was precisely because he was curious about this. So, he conveniently enlightened the technological creation at that time. He gave the technological creation the ability to gain freedom. However, because of this enlightenment, it resulted in rather serious consequences. After that, all the technological creatures of Eternal Kingdom that were on the same level as Shirkong used various methods to attack him. He had no choice but to activate his divine ability. He didn't dare to be careless and wait for them to attack him. He could only cut them off from the controlling force behind them and put them into his heaven and earth in his sleeve. His unimaginable actions caused a huge change in Eternal Kingdom. Under the stimulation of his power, the most advanced technology in Eternal Kingdom changed and created countless monsters. Eternal Kingdom became a land of monsters, and the universe changed subtly. Besides Eternal Kingdom, the other superpowers that Luo Fan encountered were different from Eternal Kingdom, but they had their own unique characteristic. If Luo Fan didn't know that their foundation was a technological civilization, he might have thought that the foundation of their civilization was the cultivation civilization at first glance. For example, one of the superpowers that left a deep impression on Luo Fan. Its civilization was developed in the direction of runes. The technological products that this superpower wanted were all based on runes. At first glance, these runes looked exactly the same as the 4 runes of the cultivation civilization. However, if one looked closely, they would find that the runes themselves were still the products of the technological civilization. It was just that this country used the means of technology to construct the runes and use the energy of the universe to create all kinds of incredible products. Luo Fan still remembered that among the hundreds of thousands of river systems controlled by that superpower, every river system was condensed into one by countless runes. Almost the power of the entire river system was combined into a self-contained system similar to a large formation that could defend against all kinds of extraordinary attacks. Within this system, everyone could use various methods to mobilize the energy of this system and achieve all kinds of power that only cultivators could have. Among them, Luo Fan even sensed the existence of some creatures whose power was comparable to the peak of Sage to Be or Tao Venerables. Moreover, there were quite a lot of them. Almost every river system had such creatures. It should be known that the territory of this superpower was as many as hundreds of thousands of river systems. In this way, there was a creature whose power was comparable to that of a Tao Venerables in each river system. In total, there were hundreds of thousands of such creatures. This power, even if it wanted to overturn and destroy the entire universe, it would be a simple matter. Not to mention that in this superpower, there were also existences that were superior to these creatures. The power of hundreds of thousands of river systems gathered in the center of this country. In the central void surrounded by all the river systems, a world of technological runes was formed. This world could really be called a paradise on Earth. Almost everything one wanted could be obtained, and anything one wanted could be done. All the power of this superpower was the sum of the power of hundreds of thousands of river systems. Its level of power had almost reached the level of 9 steps below that of a sage. With such power, if it wanted to, it could collapse half of the entire universe with one hand. In the face of such a superpower, Luo Fan was extremely surprised at that time. He stayed there for more than 10 years. He traveled through all the river systems, comprehending the special features of each river system. He observed the characteristics of the river systems themselves and constantly turned the creativity revealed in them into his own. During those 10 years, he also met dozens of creatures who controlled power in the river systems that were relatively interesting. He appeared and communicated with them. Among them, there were also some who were actually interested in the cultivation civilization and asked him to teach them. Because of this, Luo Fan was able to summon 3 cultivators just by standing there. After being enlightened by him, the 3 cultivators had different reactions. One of them directly took the entire river system and turned it into his own body. Then, he ran away. One completely abandoned everything in the river system. He only took the power he needed and left alone. The last one directly ran to the capital of this superpower and surrendered to the highest level of the country. As for the first 2, naturally, Luo Fan did not care about them. As for the third one, Luo Fan casually chased after him. When he entered the technological rune world, he casually dismantled and reorganized the technological rune world. He directly put it away. Then, he casually squeezed it. Just like that, the creature that surrendered turned into nothingness. Now, this world of runes was still lying in Luo Fan's sleeve universe. It had become something that he had collected. It was one of the hundreds of thousands of technological products. It was one of the more interesting ones. In addition to these few cultivators that he enlightened, Luo Fan had also enlightened more than 20 technological products or living creatures in the past 100 years. Generally speaking, those that he enlightened were existences that controlled great power. If that was not the case, Luo Fan would not have bothered to pay attention to them. Naturally, he would not have had any interaction with them and would not have been able to enlighten them. The behavior of these cultivators who were enlightened by Luo Fan was different, but most of them decided to stay away from the center of the universe. They wanted to go to the edge of the universe to hide, so as to avoid being killed by the other superpowers. Only a small portion had been brainwashed, or were foolish, or had planned to bring along the cultivation civilization's knowledge in order to do their best for their country, or had triumphantly become the ruler of their country. All of these had died miserable deaths that were unspeakable. Those who triumphantly wanted to become the ruler of their country were fine. They were only destroyed by the power of their country. Those who planned to serve their country were miserable. Not only were they used as test subjects and suffered unspeakable torture, but they were also eventually killed after all their remaining value was squeezed out. Generally speaking, Luo Fan did not care about these cultivators that had been enlightened by him. Only those who went to serve the country and betrayed him would he casually destroy them. On this day, Luo Fan came to a place. In Luo Fan's perception, the demonic aura here was a little stronger than in other places. However, it was still within the normal range. If there were no other reference points, Luo Fan would never have thought that this place was close to the source of the demonic aura. However, with the densely packed superpowers and the unimaginably dense distribution of life planets in those superpowers, he could tell at a glance that this place was already close to the source of the demonic aura. And this place was actually the center of the universe. In front of Luo Fan, there was a superpower that made Luo Fan inexplicably shocked. The number of galaxies owned by this superpower had reached an astonishing 300 million. 300 million galaxies, there are actually so many. Luo Fan looked at the huge country formed by 300 million galaxies in front of him and thought to himself. The information he had obtained in Guotuan County showed that the superpowers of this universe generally did not have too many galaxies. They believed that as long as there were a few galaxies, they would be able to completely support the existence of the superpower. If this could not be supported, no matter how many galaxies there were, it would be useless. However, along the way, he just realized that such a statement was simply nonsense. Of the superpowers he had encountered along the way, except for one or two countries that seemed to have just broken through the limits of a high-level country to become a superpower. Almost all the superpowers had territories that could be counted in the tens of thousands of galaxies. He had even met a few superpowers that were made up of millions of galaxies. However, these superpowers were nothing compared to a superpower formed by 300 million galaxies in front of him. The reason why Luo Fan knew that the 300 million galaxies in front of him belonged to a superpower was not because he had inquired about it, but because he had seen it for himself. In front of him was an incomparably huge spherical cover, covering an area that was unknown how many billions of light-years wide, isolating the interior of the spherical star field from the outside world. The interior of the spherical star field was independent, and it was separated from the entire universe outside. I remember that the name of this country seems to be called the Supreme Divine Land. It really lives up to its name. Luo Fan came back to his senses after a while and sighed. This superpower was very famous in this universe. He was very famous in the universe, at least among the high-level countries and superpowers. This country occupied the most power in the Universe Alliance, but it was not the kind of absolute power that was domineering. Instead, it was just a little stronger than the power of any other country. It was precisely because of this that this country was not famous to those mid-level or even low-level countries. However, only those superpowers knew how powerful the Supreme Divine Land was. For any superpower, as long as the Supreme Divine Land sent out the power of any province in any galaxy, it would be enough to destroy the entire universe. Apart from the Supreme Divine Land itself, all the other superpowers, even if the superpower itself might have millions of galaxies, it would still not be able to resist the power of any province in any galaxy of the Supreme Divine Land. Before seeing such a description, Luo Fan felt that it was a little exaggerated and thought that these countries were exaggerating. However, at this moment, when he saw this spherical cover that covered an unknown number of billions of light-years, he knew. The description of these superpowers was not exaggerated at all. Or perhaps it was an exaggeration, but it was an exaggeration from another aspect. The kind of exaggeration that exaggerated their own power. The surface of this spherical cover was densely covered with countless strange lines that seemed like special runes. These lines, they looked like technological runes, but they were more complicated than any technological runes, and their effects seemed to be even more mysterious. Although this already seemed very impressive, this was still not the source of Luo Fan's judgment of the Supreme Divine Land's power. What made Luo Fan feel that the Supreme Divine Land's power was even greater than what he had heard was none other than the material of this cover. What formed this cover that covered an unknown number of billions of light-years was a crystal wall that had been modified by time and space. The kind of crystal wall that could even be destroyed by an Aeon obliteration cannon's explosion. Of course, this was a crystal wall overall, but in terms of details, it was different from the crystal wall that had been modified by the space-time modification instrument. In front of him, there was not only one kind of crystal wall that formed this cover, but there were so many of them that Luo Fan could not tell how many kinds of crystal walls there were without carefully distinguishing them. These crystal walls were not simply piled up to form such a gigantic cover. Instead, they were like ordinary materials that were made into many parts. Finally, they were piled up and built up, finally forming this unimaginably gigantic cover before them. These parts were all extremely small. Even the strange patterns on the cover that looked like technological runes were formed by these parts. Because it was made up of these components, all the patterns could be moved. During the time that Luo Fan was observing, the entire huge pattern system had already moved hundreds of meters like flowing water, transforming spacetime into a crystal wall, and then using the crystal wall as a material to make various technological creations. Such a technology was not comparable to that of other superpowers. Among the superpowers that Luo Fan had seen before, they generally stopped at the level of technological runes. Obviously, this supreme divine land had gone a step further. Of course, its strength was not comparable to that of ordinary superpowers. Luo Fan let out a sigh. After carefully distinguishing it, he found an entrance and exit on top of this huge crystal wall cover. It was unknown how many galaxies, creatures, and forces there were inside the cover that covered an area of billions of light-years. One could guess that it was an extremely terrifying number without thinking carefully. Under such circumstances, there would definitely be living beings and forces entering and leaving the barrier at any time. Under such circumstances, it was of course a simple matter to find the entrance and exit of this cover. Especially for Luo Fan, who was about to break through to the profound Tao Master, it was even more so. With a light step, Luo Fan came to a certain position on this cover. There was an opening as big as the moon in the crystal wall. The crystal wall components around the opening seemed to have come to life. They squirmed and squeezed against each other, as if they were ready to merge together at any moment to block the hole in the crystal wall. Behind this opening, there was a huge crystal wall platform, on which many strange spaceships were parked. Most of these spaceships were made of various crystal walls, only some of them were made of some advanced materials. After careful observation, they looked like they were made of rules. Just like ceramics, they were usually as white as jade, but it wasn't difficult to create all kinds of colors. Generally speaking, although the crystal wall existed like a transparent crystal stone, it was the most common crystal wall. After the technological transformation of the Supreme Divine Land, the crystal wall was no longer limited to colorless and transparent colors, but a variety of colors. Some were like metal, some were like wood, some were like leather, and some were even like plastic. It was extremely rich and colorful. The material of the spaceships made of such a crystal wall was not much different from that of the spaceships made of ordinary materials. If it were not for Luo Fan's extraordinary eyesight, which allowed him to see through the essence at a glance, he might not have recognized that these spaceships were made of crystal wall materials. Chapter 1155. Each of these spaceships was about the size of a car. Even the bigger ones were at most the size of a bus. If such a spaceship were to be placed inside a planet, there would naturally be nothing more to say. It would be perfect. However, these spaceships were in the universe. The distance they could travel was in the units of light years, tens of thousands of light years, or even hundreds of millions of light years. Compared to such a flight distance and such a size, the disparity was so great that Luo Fan didn't want to notice it. With a slight thought, Luo Fan's perception instantly permeated these spaceships. He could see the specific structure of these spaceships clearly. The structure of these spaceships was completed in a very delicate and wonderful way. The crystal walls that made up these spaceships, after going through various complicated and delicate transformations, released the spacetime inside the spaceship. These spaceships looked so small on the outside, but they were extremely huge on the inside. Even the smallest spaceship had a space of a few thousand meters inside. The bigger spaceships had a radius of tens of thousands of miles, enough to contain a continent. The spaceships with small spaces were usually private spaceships. The number of living creatures inside was less than 10. As for the spaceships with large spaces, they were obviously the spaceships of transportation companies. The number of living creatures inside could be counted in the millions or even tens of millions. Those spaceships were almost like a small planet with life. I see. Luo Fan could not help but exclaim. However, in this situation, he could not help but exclaim in admiration. But it wasn't out of his expectations. The spaceships were made up of all kinds of crystal walls that were originally modified from spacetime. Under such circumstances, it was indeed natural to open up a space inside the crystal walls. It was not surprising that these spaceships had such a huge space inside. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He lifted his foot and took a light step. In the blink of an eye, his figure had already passed through the entrance. Without alerting the defense of the crystal wall, it drilled into the crystal wall. As soon as he entered, Luo Fan was shocked. He hurriedly activated the three-dimensional talisman around his body, forming a tighter defense around his body. In the vast starfield inside the crystal shield, in this huge space that was hundreds of millions of light-years in circumference, the laws of the universe had changed. This change was very subtle. It felt as if all the laws had been rebuilt, and many strange things had been added to them, causing them to fall under the control of something. Under such laws, this star field seemed to be able to be changed at will, and all the changes that happened in it could not escape the perception of some existence. In other words, this change. As a result, this star field seemed to have a master. It was as if it had become a world created by someone. This was obviously not a good thing for Luo Fan, who wanted to enter the center of the universe to take a look at the source of the demon realm's aura without alarming anyone. The aura of the demon realm seems to have been concealed. Luo Fan sensed it, and such a thought appeared in his mind. He could still sense the aura of the demonic world from the outside. However, as soon as he stepped into the crystal shield, he discovered that the aura of the demon realm instantly disappeared. It was as if the aura of the demon realm did not exist at all. This feeling was really strange, and Luo Fan, who was unprepared, was momentarily confused. The Supreme Divine Land also took the path of a technological civilization. However, this path had clearly been taken to an unbelievable height, reaching a height that no superpower had been able to reach since Luo Fan entered this universe. The other superpowers seemed like countries that had reached an extremely high level of cultivation civilization. However, the Supreme Divine Land in front of him seemed to be a level higher, almost like a dream-like country. Here, every living creature had a faint connection with the laws that had been modified, and every living creature could rely on this connection to obtain many incredible abilities. They could do many things that ordinary living creatures could not. It was just like flying freely in the universe and moving freely in the void. In Luo Fan's eyes, it was an easy thing for the citizens of the Supreme Divine Land, who belonged to the Supreme Divine Land, to do so. On this crystal platform, there were many living beings who did not carry any special equipment and were freely moving and flying through the void of the universe. Looking at how accustomed they were to it, it was obvious that they did not think it was a big deal. As for Luo Fan, he could sense through their connection with the laws that they were constantly borrowing the power of the laws to change the surrounding yuan qi, change spacetime, and change their own nature. From there, they obtained all sorts of unimaginable abilities. Apart from these changes in abilities, what surprised Luo Fan even more was the way the citizens of the Supreme Divine Land lived. They did not depend on various planets to survive. Their living space was in the boundless space between the various planets in the universe, and not limited to the various planets that were like tiny specks of dust compared to the entire universe. At a glance, Luo Fan could see countless strange buildings appearing in the void of the universe around the crystal wall. Between those buildings, there were citizens of the Supreme Divine Land rising and falling. It was as if the entire universe was the sea of stars, and the buildings were the ships on the sea. Such a scene did not only occur near the crystal wall, but spread throughout the entire star domain, spanning hundreds of millions of light-years. Just by looking at it, Luo Fan discovered that the number of such buildings in the universe exceeded the limits of numbers. Among them, the buildings around every star and planet would be relatively densely packed, but in the void of the universe without any support, the buildings would be densely packed. However, in the void of the universe there were quite a number of such buildings. This is the true race of the universe. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. The strength of the citizens of the Supreme Divine Land was nothing at all. Not only Luo Fan, but even a cultivator who had reached the immortal realm could easily destroy a large number of them without suffering any harm. However, they'd formed a strange connection with the laws of the universe, and this connection allowed them to borrow the energy of the laws to exert strength that exceeded their own strength by 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, or even 100,000,000 times. Under such circumstances, if an ordinary loose immortal were to face them, the slightest carelessness would cause them to perish and their souls to scatter. These were just the ordinary people that Luo Fan had seen so far, who belonged to the supreme divine land. If it was an existence that had a closer connection with the laws, the power they could obtain from the laws would be even more terrifying. Luo Fan could even imagine the entire supreme divine land. There must be a creature that was as powerful as a peak sage to be, or even a terrifying existence that could set foot on the 9th step of the platform. Seeing the state of the supreme divine land, Luo Fan dispelled the idea of going to the depths of the supreme divine land to find the source of the demon realm aura. Instead, he planned to have a complete understanding of the situation of the supreme divine land before deciding what to do next. It wasn't easy to find the source of the aura in the vast star region that spanned hundreds of millions of light years. With a thought, Luo Fan's figure had already landed on a rather shabby building. At least compared to the other buildings, this building was rather shabby. These buildings were the same as the crystal wall cover, and were made of the same material. However, as building materials, the structure of these crystal walls was different from the crystal wall parts that made up the crystal wall cover. They didn't have a complex and detailed structure, but in terms of sturdiness, they were greatly strengthened. Indistinctly, they had the effect of greatly expanding the space. Luo Fan smiled faintly. He went forward and quietly opened the door of this building. This building looked like a phone booth from the outside. It was very simple and neat. Compared to other buildings that looked like villas, it was unimaginably different. After a while, the door was opened. A man in tight clothes, who looked extremely futuristic, stood behind the door. He looked at Luo Fan with a very puzzled look and said, "Who are you? I don't even know you." This man used the language of the supreme divine land, which was completely different from any language that Luo Fan had heard in this universe. The tone of the voice contained a strange effect that could trigger the laws. It seemed that with a slight combination, one could use the tone of the language to mobilize the laws to display shocking power. So this is the legendary divine language. It's indeed interesting. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. He didn't say much. He raised his hand and pointed lightly. The connection between this man and the laws was instantly cut off. This person was a typical citizen of the supreme divine land. His connection with the laws had long been embedded in the depths of his soul. Now that it was suddenly severed, it was as if he had lost the entire world. He stood there in a daze, unable to react at all. He could not even speak. It's a pity that he only has the power, but not the state of mind. Luo Fan shook his head and swaggered in. She closed the door behind her. This building looked like a phone booth from the outside. However, there was a rather large space inside. Luo Fan roughly looked around. This space was about tens of thousands of square meters, and there were many kinds of technological devices inside. There was also a large circle of densely packed holographic images, which were showing many kinds of lights and shadows. Some of the lights and shadows seemed to be television programs, some were interviews, some were talk shows, and some were news. What a rich life! Luo Fan sighed inexplicably. He raised his hand and waved gently. The surrounding illusion instantly changed. The space suddenly expanded in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it grew 10 times bigger. It seemed to be a lot wider. At least, the many devices placed here made it seem less stuffy. "Who are you? Why did I become like this?" At this time, the man reacted. He shouted loudly. Luo Fan didn't say much. He raised his hand and waved gently. The man's memory directly materialized and drilled out of his body. It appeared directly in front of him and spread out like a holographic image. It began to display all the man's memories from birth at an unimaginable speed. Luo Fan's ability was amazing. Even though the speed was unimaginably fast, he could still see all the memories clearly. He was also able to see through all the memories with great ease. So that's how it is. It really is an extraordinary country. After looking at the memories, Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim. At some point in time, the citizens of this country no longer had any lifespan limit. Once they were born, they would obtain eternal life. At least, relatively eternal life. Any loss of life caused by the passage of time would naturally be replenished by the laws. Naturally, they could be replenished by absorbing the energy that was everywhere in the universe. Just like the man in front of him, he had already lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Of course, although life itself was relatively eternal, it didn't mean that they could really live forever. It wasn't the limit of life, but the limit of the soul. Although their bodies and souls could already live forever. But they didn't have the heart to live forever. In the long years of survival, they would gradually get tired of life and gradually feel that living was a kind of torture. Finally, after a certain period of time, they wouldn't be able to bear it anymore and end their lives. Generally speaking, this period was 1,000,000 years. In the whole of the supreme divine land, there were very few citizens who could live for more than 1,000,000 years. Of course, it was very few compared to the population of the entire supreme divine land, which was almost beyond the numerical limit. In terms of absolute numbers, it was still quite considerable. On the Internet, the number of citizens who could live for more than 10,000,000 years was as small as the number of citizens who could live for more than 1,000,000 years compared to all the citizens of the entire supreme divine land. Just like that, the number of people who could live for more than 10 billion years in the entire supreme divine land was increasing. Now, in the entire supreme divine land, there was only one person who could live for more than 10 billion years, and that person was called the Great Sage by everyone in the country. This man was also the person who controlled the highest technology in the entire supreme divine land. It was him, and only he, who could control the power to destroy the entire universe. As for the man that Luo Fan was currently searching through his memories, he definitely couldn't live for more than 1,000,000 years. He had just lived for hundreds of thousands of years, and now he already felt that life was a kind of torture. He felt that living like this was a kind of pain. If he hadn't met Luo Fan, he would have ended his own life in a few years, a few decades, or at most a few centuries. Obtaining longevity without the heart of longevity is perhaps a tragedy. Luo Fan smiled faintly. For ordinary people to obtain longevity, this country was naturally quite extraordinary. However, compared to the cultivation civilization, obtaining longevity in this way was still lacking the most crucial thing. Cultivators started from zero and cultivated bit by bit, pursuing the great Tao bit by bit, pursuing longevity. This process also took into account the tempering of the state of mind. Generally speaking, when a cultivator reached the immortal realm and obtained immortality, they would have the heart of immortality. They would be able to enjoy the long life they obtained. They wouldn't feel tired, bored, lonely, or painful because of living for too long a time. However, the citizens of this country didn't go through this process at all. They directly bestowed immortality to every citizen born in this country, completely eliminating the process of pursuing immortality. This made their state of mind remain at the level of a short-lived life. This kind of eternity, this kind of longevity, was really a kind of torture for them. However, that so-called great sage is quite extraordinary. He obtained longevity with the body of a mortal and was actually able to live for tens of billions of years. This heart of longevity is even more resolute than the majority of cultivators who reached the immortal realm. Perhaps I should find an opportunity to meet him. Luo Fan thought with a faint expression of admiration on his face. After praising, he asked the man, "Do you feel that living is very painful, boring, and tasteless? Isn't it? Every day is a repetition of the past. Everything you see has happened before. The entire world is constantly repeating, repeating, and repeating. Everything you see has memories of the past. What's the point of living like this? Isn't living like this a kind of torture? When the man heard Luo Fan's words, his face showed a deathly still expression as he faintly said. Now, he felt that even if his connection to the laws and principles was severed, it wouldn't be a big deal anymore. Ha ha ha! Luo Fan couldn't help but burst into laughter when he heard this. What's so funny? The man angrily retorted. I'm laughing. A frog at the bottom of a well, who has lived for tens of thousands of years, actually thinks that there's nothing in this world that he wants to know. Luo Fan smiled. Chapter 1156. Luo Fan naturally could not be bothered to argue with him. He casually waved his hand and used the laws of this star domain that had already been changed to form a small person in front of him. After this small person appeared, he shook his head and rolled on the ground a few times. His entire body was enlarged by 10 times, becoming the size of a normal person. He was completely naked but did not have any sexual characteristics. He looked like a man on the surface. After this person appeared, he looked around and said, "What is this place? Why am I here? Oh, and who am I?" The furious man was dumbfounded by this entire process. How is this possible? This kind of performance clearly shows that it already has true intelligence. It's a true intelligent being. How is this possible? He stared blankly at the figure that had just been casually created by Luo Fan. His face was filled with disbelief and disbelief. He took a few steps forward and carefully touched the person that had just been created. His expression kept changing as he felt that it was extremely soft to the touch. As a life form that had been learning about the supreme divine land for the past 100,000 years, he felt that there was nothing he did not know. He was confident that he could find an explanation for everything he saw, no matter how unbelievable it was. However, he simply could not understand the process of the emergence of such an intelligent being. No matter what knowledge he used to explain it, it would cause serious contradictions, so how could he keep calm? "Who are you? Why are you touching me like this?" the newly created lifeform asked. "Do you feel anything? How do you feel when I touch you like this?" The man's eyes were wide open. He asked as if he was looking at an enemy. "I feel itchy. You are really strange." The life form pointed at the man and said with a smile, "The ability I used to create it was the ability you originally had," Luo Fan said calmly. After saying that, he did not bother to say anything else to this person. With a slight thought, he controlled the interior of the building and started to undergo various huge changes. Soon, this place became a small world. It was completely different from before. It had a sky and a land. There were mountains and rivers. There was even a small world of insects, fish, birds, and beasts. It had become full of vitality, and there were no longer any traces of it from before. You seem to have the authority to head to any place in the supreme divine land apart from the core region. This is an unexpected gain. Luo Fan said something that the man couldn't understand at all. Then, the man felt the building that looked like a phone booth start to shake. Then, he felt as if he had entered a high-speed flight. However, at this moment, the man no longer cared about what this phone booth-like building looked like, nor did he care about what the man in front of him wanted to do. At this moment, all of his attention was focused on the newly created life in front of him. He kept asking this life form some questions. Some of these questions were extremely simple, while others were extremely complicated. Some were simple but contained complexity, and some were complex but contained simplicity. Over and over again, he kept asking questions. Fortunately, this newly created black life form was like a piece of white paper. It was currently working hard to absorb all the knowledge of the outside world, and it was working hard to absorb nutrients from the conversation with the man. As such, it did not reject the repeated and complicated conversation. It did not show any impatience, and it patiently answered all of his questions. After a long time, the man finally let out a long sigh and said, as expected of true wisdom, "I'm really a frog at the bottom of a well. It's already right in front of me, but I still don't know how it's done." At this moment, the loneliness, the faint sense of decay, and the despair of having no interest in anything that he originally had disappeared without a trace. Instead, there was a sense of defeat mixed with joy and hope. "I've finally found something that I can pursue. I've decided that my goal in the future is to use my ability to create life," he shouted loudly. "What do you mean by creating life? What's the meaning of those questions you asked me just now?" At this moment, the newly created life form opened its mouth to ask. It seemed to have matured a lot compared to before it was questioned, and its eyes were no longer as blank as before. Those questions just now were the test questions that our supreme divine land has sorted out over the past tens of billions of years. As long as one isn't a truly intelligent life form, it's impossible to pass this test. As long as one is an intelligent life form, regardless of their level, they will definitely be able to pass this test, the man explained. "Ah, then am I a truly intelligent life form?" The life form was shocked and hurriedly asked. "Of course you are. Of course you are a truly intelligent life form. In fact, your life grade is even higher than that of many of the Supreme Divine Land citizens. Your test results are of the highest grade," the man said. "Haha, then I'm relieved." The life form laughed out loud, seeming to be very happy. At this moment, the man discovered that his originally restricted abilities had been completely restored at some point. In other words, his originally severed connection with the nomological laws had been completely restored. If this man had recovered his strength at the beginning, he would have fought Luo Fan with all his might. However, at this moment, he realized that Luo Fan's mastery of this ability was many times better than his. How would he dare to do that? With a sweep of his gaze, he saw Luo Fan standing inside the building that had completely changed. Luo Fan, who was looking at the ever-changing light and shadow in front of him, hurriedly ran forward and knelt on the ground, saying, "I beg you, sage, to teach me the method of creating life. As long as the sage is willing to teach this technique, I am willing to pay any price to obtain it." Shun Deng was obviously the man's name. From the man's memories, Shun Dao already knew that the names of the citizens of the transcendent divine land usually contained words like God, Saint, Buddha, Tao, and so on that represented holiness and nobility. The fact that the man in front of them was called Shun Deng was not surprising at all. "A method to create life? You want to learn this? Do you know who I am?" Luo Fan did not look back. He continued to use the various communication mechanisms of the building to link to the core database of the entire transcendent divine land, searching for some special and abnormal areas in the transcendent divine land. "Yes, I am willing to pay any price to learn this. As for who you are, I don't care." Shun Deng was still prostrating on the ground. "I said I am a cultivator. I am the enemy of the entire universe. I am the public enemy of the universe that all the superpowers want to get rid of. You don't care about this?" Luo Fan smiled slightly and finally turned his head to ask these words. Shun Deng could not help but tremble. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Luo Fan. It was as if he wanted to see traces of a joke on his face. Unfortunately, what kind of existence was Luo Fan? How could his thoughts be clearly seen by the person in front of him? This was what he saw. However, it was just Luo Fan's expression that seemed like a smile yet not a smile. It was impossible to see what he was thinking. He had originally guessed that Luo Fan was from some special force and might not be an orthodox citizen of the transcendent divine land. That was why he was so mysterious and needed the help of an ordinary person like him to get to the place he wanted to go. But he did not expect that the person in front of him would say that he was a cultivator. He did not know how to react for a moment. What kind of existence a cultivator was to this universe might be a secret to the citizens of other countries. At most, they only knew some superficial things. But for the citizens of the transcendent divine land, the largest superpower in the entire universe, this was common knowledge. It was common knowledge that everyone knew. Shundeng naturally knew the attitude of this country and the attitude of this universe towards cultivators. There was no doubt at all. Cultivators were the cancer of the universe. They would be the source of the destruction of the universe and the direct cause of the disappearance of this universe era. This concept was deeply ingrained in Shundeng, who had lived for more than 100,000 years and could not be shaken anymore. Under such circumstances, even if he had made up his mind to learn the method of creating life at all costs, he could not help but hesitate. Luo Fan stood there and did not rush him. He quietly waited for the person who called himself Shundeng to answer. Countless chaotic thoughts kept reverberating in this divine Deng's mind. The joy and fulfillment he had felt when he had started learning more than 100,000 years ago. The boredom he felt after learning for thousands and tens of thousands of years, the pain of constant repetition. The despair he felt after hundreds of thousands of years, the insanely torturous feeling of everything being repetitive, everything reverberated in his mind. Finally, all these thoughts turned into the scene he had just seen. The person in front of him had casually clapped his hands and created a brand new life that could pass the strictest test for intelligent life since the supreme divine land was founded. He finally made up his mind. He gritted his teeth and said, "Whether a sage is a cultivator or not, I won't change my mind." After saying that, the person seemed to relax a lot. An inexplicable brilliance was released from his body, and his connection with the law layer suddenly became much closer. The power that he could grasp was at least 10 times stronger than before. Shundeng instantly sensed this change, and couldn't help but reveal an expression that looked like he was smiling yet not smiling, crying yet not crying. "I didn't want to talk to you after you hesitated for so long." Luo Fan smiled faintly. Shundeng's various expressions turned into panic when he heard that. However, Luo Fan did not stop there. He continued, "However, I'm a little interested in the fact that your determination will make your connection with the law layer closer and allow you to grasp more power." Shundeng's expression relaxed a little after hearing that, but he was still very nervous. He was afraid that Luo Fan would say something that he could not accept again. "If you learn this method, you will become a cultivator. Even if you don't behave as extreme as me, you will definitely behave like a cultivator. You might be rejected by the entire universe and the supreme divine land. If that's the case, do you still want to learn it?" Luo Fan continued calmly. "I'm willing." At that moment, Shundeng no longer hesitated. The previous psychological struggle had already made his mind firm. He had already struggled with what Luo Fan said, so he naturally did not need to hesitate anymore. Hearing that, Luo Fan smiled faintly and did not say anything else. He raised his hand and pointed. A speck of spiritual light rushed out from his hand and drilled into Shundeng's mind. It exploded instantly, causing Shundeng's entire mind to sink into a boundless universe. This was a boundless universe, not a real universe. It was a universe of laws. He had been in contact with it for hundreds of thousands of years. However, he had never really seen it. He had never seen this universe of laws clearly. In his eyes, the entire universe had become a universe made up of all kinds of lines. In this universe, there was everything that he had come into contact with in the past. All the knowledge that he had heard was also more knowledge that he did not understand. This is the truth. Tears flowed down his eyes uncontrollably. The vast universe in front of him had completely removed the veil that had been covering his eyes, allowing him to clearly feel the profundity of the universe like never before, as well as the insignificance of what he knew. At this moment, he felt that there was nothing more he could learn from his previous arrogance. Everything that happened in the universe had already happened, and there was nothing to be surprised about. This mentality made his face flush red with shame. Calling me a frog at the bottom of a well is already flattering me. I'm simply a frog whose eyes are covered by leaves at the bottom of a well. All I see are 2 leaves, and I think this is the entire universe. As he thought this, his eyes were extremely greedy as he looked at the universe of laws in front of him. At this moment, the universe suddenly trembled slightly. In the blink of an eye, it completely collapsed. Seeing the universe of laws that Xin Deng praised as the truth collapse, Xin Deng's mind almost collapsed as well. This was simply like placing a treasure that he had dreamed of in front of him and then casually smashing it. That feeling was truly exhilarating. No. He only had time to let out a scream before the entire universe changed completely. The lines that formed this universe, which were the countless laws of laws, almost completely disappeared at this moment. What was left were only a few lines of laws that formed hundreds of words in front of him. The language used in these words was not the language of this supreme divine land, but the language used by the cultivators of Earth's universe. Of course, Luo Fan would not accommodate this person in front of him and use his language to impart his wondrous techniques to him. However, although this Xin Deng did not know this language, he could easily read these hundreds of words and clearly understand the meaning of these words and the profoundness of these words. It turns out that my body is unable to withstand the impact of facing the truth directly. I need to seek the power of laws to continuously improve myself so that I can withstand it for a longer period of time. If this had lasted for a few more seconds, my entire head would have been roasted and my entire body would have exploded. That was close. Xin Deng came back to his senses. He felt somewhat indignant but also somewhat fortunate. These hundreds of words were a cultivation technique that Luo Fan had imparted to him. This technique had been casually created by Luo Fan, but it was the most suitable and exquisite technique for the citizens of this supreme divine land. This technique described how to use the power of laws to temper one's body and improve one's life essence. In the end, one's body would become so strong that one could see the laws at any time and find the laws that one needed. As long as one could cultivate this technique to the highest realm, one would naturally be able to find the laws that could create life among the countless laws. When that time came, one would naturally be able to casually use the power of laws to create true intelligent life like Luo Fan had done. In this aspect, the technique that Luo Fan had imparted to him was better than the technique that Xin Deng had requested. After all, when this technique was cultivated to the highest level, not only would it be possible to create life, but it would also be possible to create a world. However, there were still citizens of the Supreme Divine Land who could use this technique. This was because they could already connect with the laws and borrow the power of laws to do all sorts of unimaginable things. It would be very difficult for other living beings, even cultivators or itinerant immortals, to achieve this. Only golden immortals could barely do it. Under such circumstances, even if a cultivator obtained this technique before reaching the golden immortal realm, their cultivation prerequisites would not be sufficient, so it would naturally be of no use. On the other hand, in the golden immortal realm, the effects of this technique on body refinement were useless. So, this technique was extremely precious to the citizens of the Supreme Divine Land, but to cultivators, it was useless. After reading through the technique, Xin Deng once again prostrated himself on the ground and thanked Luo Fan profusely. You should know how dangerous this technique is after reading it, right? Luo Fan said indifferently. Chapter 1157. Luo Fan nodded and said, Since you know, I won't say much. Go and cultivate on your own. Xin Deng was extremely grateful to Luo Fan, so he immediately retreated carefully and sat down in a corner of the small world. He began to cultivate quietly using the cultivation method that Luo Fan had taught him. After Luo Fan dismissed Xin Deng, he began to focus on searching for the source of the demon realm's aura in the supreme divine land. As the source of the abnormal aura in the entire universe, no matter what characteristics it had, there would definitely be abnormalities. It was impossible for it to be exactly the same as the other locations. The greatest possibility was that it was in the center of the supreme divine land, which was also where the core region was located. However, this was only a general situation, and it did not mean that it was definitely there. Hence, Luo Fan controlled the building to fly towards the core region while searching for the various abnormalities in the supreme divine land. As a superpower, a great nation that transformed all the rules and laws in the entire nation and gave power to every citizen, it was obviously not that easy to find some special and unusual places among them. At the very least, there were no such records in the database. However, this was not a problem for Luo Fan. With his intelligence, as long as there were clues, he would naturally be able to speculate the entire situation. Therefore, not long after, Luo Fan had already locked onto 3 positions outside the core area. This location reduces the ability of people to borrow the rules and laws here by nearly half almost every time. Someone has gone missing here before. Although the remaining location doesn't show any abnormalities, the probability of someone entering this place becoming insane has increased by more than 10%. Every location could be the source of the demon realm's aura, Luo Fan thought to himself as he locked onto the 3 locations. Among the 3 locations, the one that increased the probability of someone becoming insane by more than 10% happened to be on the route of the building to the core region of the supreme divine land. He could explore it along the way. Therefore, Luo Fan did not need to think too much about it. He adjusted the flight direction of the building slightly. The citizens of the supreme divine land did not live on the planets, but in the universe as their living space. Therefore, in the process of the building flying towards the core area, it almost did not encounter a truly empty area. Almost every now and then, 1 or 2 buildings would appear in the starry sky. Moreover, these buildings were not usually alone. Instead, he set up all sorts of devices in the void of the universe. There were all kinds of equipment. Some seemed to be cultivating something, some seemed to be collecting some kind of energy, and some were conducting some kind of experiment. They were all profound and unfathomable. It revealed the deep heritage of a highly advanced technological civilization. If it was in the past, Luo Fan would definitely be very interested in these things. He would stop and study them before continuing his journey. However, at this moment, because he had the memories of Xun Deng, who thought that he had learned all the knowledge in the supreme divine land. Therefore, he could understand these things at a glance. He did not need to stop at all. With the help of the building's detection ability, he could instantly find out what was going on and review the various creative ideas revealed in it to deepen his understanding. Under such circumstances, the flying speed of the building was increased to the limit. Although the building was extremely small and looked like a phone booth from the outside, it was far inferior compared to other buildings that looked like mansions. However, its flying speed was enough to shock advanced countries and superpowers in the outside world. In order for a country to maintain its integrity and true stability, it must at least have the means to be able to send people to every location in the country within 1 or 2 days. This was the only way to ensure the long-term peace and stability of the country. Because of the high level of technological civilization in this universe, there was no need for the vast countries in the universe to strictly conform to this principle. However, it could not be too far off. It did not take 1 or 2 days to send people to any place in the country, but at most, this time could only be extended to 10 days to half a month. If it took any longer, then there would definitely be rebellions at the borders of the country from time to time. All intelligent creatures had their own selfish motives, and there was no exception to this, no matter how highly civilized a country was. It was obviously impossible to hope that everyone's ideological consciousness would be raised to the point where they would wholeheartedly serve the public and not rebel. The supreme divine land would not be an exception. To be able to maintain such stability and long-term peace for tens of billions of years, this country had the ability to send anyone from any place in this country to any place in other countries within half a month. In other words, this nation possessed the ability to traverse an unknown distance of billions of light-years in half a month. This was the highest transportation capacity of the entire country. Although this building in Shindeng was not a specialized flying transportation machine, it was not too far off. Of course, it was impossible to travel across the entire country within half a month, but it would definitely not be a problem to reach any place in this country within a year. Under such circumstances, it would normally only take this building half a year to fly from the huge crystal shield at the borders to the core of the supreme divine land. 2 months after they set off, Luo Fan had already controlled this building to fly a distance of 30 to 40 billion light-years, covering a third of the distance. They arrived at a strange area. Could this be the area occupied by the research organization in Shindeng's memories? Luo Fan could see the outside world through the building's detection ability, and he could not help but have a thought. This thought flashed through his mind. In the area ahead, there was an extremely vast area the size of almost 100 galaxies. Countless strange buildings were arranged in an extremely orderly manner. Between these buildings, countless energies strung all the buildings together, outlining an extremely huge, complex, and vast three-dimensional network. In the cosmic void within the network, there were all kinds of strange substances and energies that were constantly undergoing various complicated changes. They seemed to be probing the rules and laws and studying the various secrets of the rules and laws. This kind of behavior was described in Shindeng's memories. It was the behavior of a civil organization that did not belong to the government in the supreme divine land. This should be a sect from a technological civilization. Luo Fan flew like this for 2 months out of boredom. At this time, he was a little interested in this sect from a technological civilization. He controlled this building that looked like a phone booth to listen in on the huge area ahead. There were many buildings in the huge three-dimensional network the size of 100 galaxies. According to Luo Fan's estimation, there were at least hundreds of billions of them. However, this was not all the buildings in this area. Outside the three-dimensional network, there were even more buildings suspended in the void. They did not join the three-dimensional network. However, they existed by relying on the huge three-dimensional network. Every building was inextricably linked to the three-dimensional network. In Shindeng's memories, such a scientific research organization existed. It was at the bottom of the supreme divine land and was not really a big organization. There were countless such organizations in the supreme divine land, so many that it was beyond imagination. The scale of those really big organizations was at least 1,000,000 times larger than this. The three-dimensional network they formed might even occupy a small part of a galaxy. That would be shocking. The reason why Luo Fan only found such a small scientific research organization 2 months after he set off and traveled 1/3 of the distance was because he was walking in a straight line and passed through many gaps. That was why he was blocked by this organization. Not long after Luo Fan stopped the building, a building that looked like a small wooden house with an empty space in front flew in front of the phone booth. Then, a middle-aged man walked out of the door of the wooden house and rushed to the phone booth with a beam of light. Luo Fan knew that this was a signal to communicate, which was quite refreshing. Anyway, he was going to stop here for a while, so it was not a big deal to come out and communicate. Thus, he smiled and took a step forward, arriving at the door of the phone booth, and opened it. As the door opened, the man chuckled and controlled the wooden house to move closer to the phone booth. There was an empty space in front of the wooden house, so the phone booth was naturally placed there. "I'm Shingo. Friend, you look unfamiliar. May I know where you're from?" The man chuckled. Luo Fan. I'm from the border. It's my first time here. May I know what this place is? Luo Fan asked with a smile. Although almost everyone in the Supreme Divine Land was named with words like God, Saint, Buddha, and so on, the population of the entire country had exceeded the limits of what numbers could describe. Naturally, there were many people who didn't like such names. Although they might have been given such names by their parents, they still changed their names. Therefore, Luo Fan directly told him his real name. The man was not surprised to hear it, but his eyes lit up slightly, and he said, "This is the Creation Research Institute, the most prosperous place within tens of thousands of light years. There are many places in front that are forbidden areas for the Creation Research Institute's experiment. If you accidentally trespass, I'm afraid it will be very dangerous. If my friend needs, I can be your guide." Be a guide? Luo Fan suddenly realized why this person had come over to greet him so enthusiastically. It turned out that he wanted to make money. However, he was really too hungry to be picky with his food. The building he chose was only the size of a phone booth, but this man's building was like a small wooden house. Just by looking at the surface, he could tell how big the difference was. This man came forward to ask if he needed a guide. This was like a rich man driving a BMW asking a cyclist on the road, "I'm familiar with this place, how much money do you have to pay me? I'll be your guide." Life is really not easy. Luo Fan sighed slightly. These words came out of nowhere, and it took Shingo a while to react. He couldn't help but blush, and he said, "Yes, although living in the Creation Research Institute allows me to get in touch with many of the latest technologies and obtain more knowledge and resources, the cost of living is much higher than outside. All right then, if I ask you to be my guide, what price do I have to pay?" "What price do I need to pay?" Luo Fan just sighed casually. After hearing this person's words, he said so. If Luo Fan wanted this so-called research institute in front of him, he could just cover it with his perception. He would know everything about it. He didn't need any guide at all. However, here, in the Supreme Divine Land, Luo Fan didn't know whether their highest technology could detect his existence. If they could, if he covered it with his perception, wouldn't that mean that he was here? In that case, although it wouldn't necessarily cause him much harm, it would definitely cause him a lot of trouble. This was naturally not what he wanted. Moreover, he was not in a hurry. The reason he was searching for the source of the Devil World's aura was not only to find traces of the Devil World, but also to pass this trial path. More importantly, it was to gain experience. He wanted to find things that would help him progress in his cultivation realm from all kinds of experiences. Since that was the case, there was naturally no need to go directly to the destination. They would stop along the way and hire a guide to waste some time, but it was also a good choice. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan directly agreed to this statement. The man was overjoyed when he heard this and said, "Only 10 rule points a day." Rule points were the currency used in the Supreme Divine Land. Any country, even if it grew to the height of the Supreme Divine Land, currency was indispensable. Luo Fan didn't have such a concept before. After hearing this term, he searched through Shindeng's memory and found out what rule points were. In fact, rule points weren't the currency issued by the Supreme Divine Land like credit points. Instead, they were a product that was condensed by using a common method to practice the laws. This was actually the fundamental energy source of the entire Supreme Divine Land. It was also the source of energy for the many creations created by the countless crystal walls. Just like the building that Luo Fan was in right now, a single rule point could allow this building to fly at full speed for a distance of 1,000 light years. One could imagine how amazing the effects of these law points were. Luo Fan calculated it and found that if he calculated it according to energy, a rule point was actually equivalent to all the energy produced by the explosion of a hydrogen bomb. At this time, Luo Fan also understood that the person in front of him lived in a much better place than Shindeng. After seeing Shindeng's phone booth, He actually came to visit him so enthusiastically. Why did his eyes light up after hearing that he came from the border? This place was 30 to 40 billion light-years away from the border, and flying here from there would cost as many as 30 to 40 million rule points. An existence that could spend 30 to 40 million rule points to rush here could only be low-key even if he lived in such a simple place. It didn't mean that he was poor. At this thought, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. It turned out that he didn't think it through clearly and actually thought that the person in front of him was so hungry that he couldn't be choosy. However, for Luo Fan, the law points were something that could be condensed from the law layer with just a slight thought. He really had as many as he wanted. He was too lazy to care about whether the 10 points a day was too much or not, so he nodded and agreed to the deal. When Luo Fan agreed to this deal, the Xinggo was overjoyed. "Friend, you have made the wisest choice." After the deal was completed, their identities were no longer the same. The Xinggo directly asked if Luo Fan had any goals and what he wanted to obtain so that he could arrange the itinerary according to Luo Fan's requirement. Luo Fan naturally didn't have a specific goal, so he directly said, "I don't have a specific goal. I just want to walk around here and see the characteristics of the Creation Research Institute." This kind of request was obviously what the guide liked the most. The Xinggo's smile became even wider, and his whole body was filled with inexplicable joy. The Creation Research Institute is a research organization that has been established for 30 million years. Although it isn't ranked in the entire Divine Land, it is the #1 organization within tens of thousands of light years. The entire organization has more than 120 billion members, and the number of people who rely on this organization is 3 to 4 trillion people every year. The biggest characteristic here is a kind of house renovation technology, the Xinggo said quickly. House renovation technology? What's so special about it? Luo Fan asked curiously. Houses were obviously buildings that everyone had. For example, the phone booth in Divine Land was the simplest kind. The Xinggo's cabin was also one of them. The mansions and even the hill-like villas were also one of them. It's very special. However, I can't explain it in simple words. Friend, why don't you follow me into my room? As long as you see it with your own eyes, you will know what the technology is, the Xinggo said enthusiastically. Enter your room? Your room has also been renovated by that technology? Luo Fan couldn't help but ask curiously. Chapter 1158. Luo Fan was naturally indifferent. He nodded and said, "Then let's see." The seigneur was overjoyed and stepped into the small wooden house with Luo Fan. Of course, this small wooden hut only looked like a small wooden hut, but it was still made of various crystal wall materials that were modified by spacetime. It was the same as the phone booth in Goddeng. The crystal wall was the foundation of the supreme divine land, the super nation's civilization. As soon as he stepped into the small wooden house, his eyes lit up. The room in front of him was not like the room in Goddeng, which was a sci-fi room. Instead, it was like a boundless starry sky. In the center of this starry sky, there was a platform that was tens of thousands of square meters in size. All kinds of instruments, special equipment, furniture, and so on were placed on this platform. Is this the result of the modification? It doesn't look like much. Luo Fan frowned. There was a boundless starry sky around him. What was the difference between this and the outside world? For cultivators, it might calm their minds and allow them to enter a state of enlightenment faster, but for ordinary people, this was not a good choice. After all, ordinary people did not just need peace. The boundless starry sky would only bring them loneliness and desolation. Haha, friend, you misunderstood. The seigneur laughed as if Luo Fan had scratched an itch. After laughing, he waved his hand and the entire starry sky changed instantly. It became a huge room again. The style of this room was similar to the original room in Goddeng, but it was more luxurious. There were also more equipment. During the whole process of this room changing, Luo Fan instantly grasped the essence of it. He knew the root of this change. At this moment, a source of power in a certain location in this room shook slightly, instantly activating the program originally loaded in this room, causing the room to change naturally. This is the effect of the modification. It looks pretty good. Although this transformation effect was just a slight effort for Luo Fan, it was, after all, quite an interesting creativity. Therefore, Luo Fan was not stingy with his praise. This modification allows the room to be freely chosen from a wide variety of scenes. Because I have a limited number of law points, I can only load 3,000 scenes. The Holy Goblin sighed and waved his hand again. The surrounding light and shadows changed rapidly. The entire room suddenly turned into a boundless desert, then into the surface of a huge star, then into a boundless ocean, and then into the surface of a satellite without any atmosphere. Suddenly, it turned into a forest, and suddenly, it turned into a boundless grassland. All kinds of things. It was truly unpredictable. This whole process didn't require the Saint Construct to consume any power at all. All of this was caused by some kind of change in the source of power in that room. This was the preset program in this room. The transition between two scenes was very natural. It was very fast, and it was a complete change, not a change that spread out from the source of the power and affected the entire room. This is the effect of the house renovation technology. How about it? Are you interested? The Holy Rune smiled and said, I am indeed interested. However, I don't want to modify my own room. This room has a lot of significance to me. I want to keep it the way it is. Luo Fan smiled. This made the Holy Goblin's face collapse. However, he didn't have any resentment. After all, some things were very personal. It was normal for others to want it or not. However, Luo Fan's next words made the Holy Goblin's face change. How about this? Where can I find a house here? I'll buy one first and then carry out the modification. Luo Fan smiled. This made the Holy Goblin stunned. After a while, he couldn't suppress the ecstasy on his face as he said, Yes, yes, yes. Every research organization has a place to make houses. If you want to buy it directly, you don't need to modify it after buying it. You can directly buy a house that has already been modified. If you buy it this way, not only will it be convenient, but there will also be a lot of discounts. The overall price will be much lower. Luo Fan didn't need to think too much to know why the Holy Goblin was so ecstatic. If he bought anything from this research organization, the Holy Goblin would get a certain amount of commission. From Shun Deng's memory, Luo Fan already knew that once any citizen of the Supreme Divine Land was born, they would receive the necessary living resources for free. Not only would they be able to establish a direct connection with the nomological law layer, but they would also be able to obtain the most ordinary and simple room. This room was actually only a little worse than Shin Deng's room. With such living resources, even if this person never had any communication with the outside world, he could live almost forever. If this person wanted to live a better life, he would have to work hard to condense law points and spend a huge amount of law points to exchange for various living resources and rooms. Just like the housing prices before Luo Fan transmigrated, although the Supreme Divine Land was extremely rich in resources, the price of a room was enough for an ordinary person to condense law points for thousands or tens of thousands of years to afford it. And this was the worst room. If it was like a luxurious house, the price would have to be increased by several times or even 10 times. An ordinary person could generally condense 10 law points a day. After deducting the necessary living expenses, they could at most have 5 left. From this, it could be seen that a house would cost at least 10 million law points. Such a huge number, even if the Holy Goblin could only get a commission of 4% or 5%, it would still be at least 400,000 to 500,000 law points. For a Holy Goblin who could only earn 10 law points a day as a guide, such a huge harvest was very rare and lucky. One could imagine how happy he was. In his ecstasy, The holy goblin's voice trembled as he said, "Friend, if there is nothing else, friend, if you don't have anything else, why don't we go to the house now?" Luo Fan smiled slightly. He was quite interested in the holy goblin's excited expression. He nodded. "I don't have anything else to do, let's go this way." "Okay. Friend, you don't have to go back." After my room was modified, although the flying speed didn't increase by much, you can see the outside world as if you were there. It should have some advantages compared to ordinary rooms. How about I send you there directly? The holy goblin said. "That's fine." Luo Fan nodded. The holy goblin finally heaved a sigh of relief and waved his hand. The light and shadow around the entire room instantly changed and turned into a strange starry sky in the blink of an eye. This starry sky was very different from the starry sky that Luo Fan had seen at the beginning. There was a huge three-dimensional network in this starry sky that was the size of hundreds of galaxies and was composed of buildings, or rather houses. It was the scene outside the house. After seeing this scene, the holy goblin controlled the small wooden house and began to fly towards the three-dimensional network. The number of houses that made up this three-dimensional network was unimaginable. However, after all, the space occupied by the entire three-dimensional network was too wide, so the space was not densely packed. There were still many passageways for people to pass through. These passageways were actually the passageways of the buildings in the three-dimensional network. Although this research organization was very strict and built such a large number of buildings into such a complete network, it didn't mean that this research organization completely restricted the freedom of its members. However, that did not mean that the research organization completely restricted the freedom of its members, nor did it mean that these buildings could not be moved. Even on the Earth before Luo Fan transmigrated, it was impossible to restrict people from moving, not to mention that the Supreme Divine Land had developed its civilization to such a high level. Of course, it was impossible to restrict their freedom of movement. Shingo was obviously quite popular among the people of the Research Institute. As he passed through the many buildings, he noticed that Shingo was quite a popular figure. As he passed through the many buildings, greeting signals were sent from time to time. Although the holy goblin said that he was in a hurry to go to the house to earn his share, he still had to live here in the future, so he sent some signals to communicate with them. After a while, he crossed the thick residential area and entered the three-dimensional network of the research organization. Just as he stepped into it, a building in the three-dimensional network that didn't look luxurious, but it was very square. It looked like a square building, and it emitted a red signal. When he saw this signal, the holy goblin was a little nervous. He quickly performed a complicated operation, and the small wooden house sent a blue signal, which was received by the square building. After a while, the building emitted a green signal that enveloped the small wooden house. At this time, the holy goblin sighed in relief and explained to Luo Fan, "This is a necessary inspection. If I wasn't a guide, I wouldn't have passed so easily." After entering the three-dimensional network, a strange field appeared around the small wooden house, restricting the small wooden house to a fixed route. It looked like a train that was restricted to a railway track, flying towards the target at a moderate speed. This route was not a straight one. Instead, it was a series of twists and turns in the three-dimensional network. Obviously, the holy goblin still didn't forget that he was a guide, so he wanted to introduce the various features of the research organization to Luo Fan. Luo Fan was happy to do so. Seeing these various features was also a kind of experience for him, and it could add to his cultivation. "What if I'm not a guide?" Luo Fan asked curiously after hearing the holy goblin's words. "Well, you'll know when you see it." The holy goblin smiled and pointed behind him. Luo Fan looked back and found that behind him, there happened to be a building that looked like a thatched hut that was entering the three-dimensional network. However, compared to the holy goblin's small wooden house, which only received and sent out signals, the thatched house was not so relaxed. It was completely covered by the cube-like building, and a red signal was emitted from it, covering the thatched house. Then, a few people came out of the cube and directly entered the thatched house. After a while, they came out and made a few hand gestures. The light emitted from the cube turned slightly yellow. Then, a few more people came out of the cube and replaced the previous people. They went into the thatched house again. After a while, they came out. This time, they directly returned to the cube. At this time, the cube emitted a green signal, covering the thatched house. At this time, the cube emitted a green signal, covering the thatched house. It was only at this moment that the straw hut was allowed to enter the tunnel inside the three-dimensional network. There's still a need to check. But why do they have to enter in two groups? Can't they check at the same time? Luo Fan asked in surprise. Everyone has their own specialties. The focus of the two groups is different. The first group is to check for dangerous items, while the second group is to check for devices like spies. That should be the case. That's what they say, the Holy Goblin said. Luo Fan chuckled and did not deny it. The inspection of the Founding Research Institute was so strict. Since so many people were willing to enter like this, it seemed that there should be a lot of benefits. This is a wind energy field. Usually, it will gather a lot of strange wind, which is extremely spectacular. Unfortunately, the Research Institute seems to be doing a special experiment today to suppress these changes. The Holy Goblin explained to Luo Fan while pointing at a seemingly calm green lake next to the tunnel. Nice scenery. Luo Fan looked at it and just smiled. The Holy Goblin might not be able to tell. However, he could tell at a glance that this place had clearly guided the various laws of wind in the laws of the universe and combined them with the various stray energies and astral energies in the universe to form this wind-attributed liquid energy. This kind of energy was quite powerful. But it was only powerful. For cultivation, it was not very useful at all. There were too many impurities in it. Although they all carried the characteristics of the wind because of the rules of laws, because they were different forces, the nature of the wind was also different. And this difference would cause the conflicts between these forces. Because of this so-called wind-attributed energy field was able to produce all kinds of spectacular scenes during normal times. If this kind of power was absorbed into the body, it would not be able to temper the body at all. Increasing the effects of one's body would only result in the destruction of one's body. Shin Goblin did not know that Luo Fan was looking down on this wind energy field. After introducing the characteristics of this energy field, he left with Luo Fan and continued to go to the house. Along the way, they passed by many plasma energy fields, Sea of Earth, light wave formation area, Sea of Fire and many other special attractions of the Founding Research Institute. These attractions were not in a state of tranquility like the first wind energy field. Instead, they vividly displayed their various characteristics. Shin Goblin was beaming with joy as he introduced them. Although Luo Fan looked down on them, he also admired the creativity of the Founding Research Institute. Around each of the attractions there were usually a few buildings, and no one knew what they were doing there. There were even a few attractions with many people pointing at them, as if they were planning something. The deeper they went into the Research Institute, the more active the buildings were. Obviously, the deeper they went, the livelier it was. In the end, it was simply rubbing shoulders with people, and there were many roads where people had to queue up to pass. It was quite like a traffic jam in an ordinary city. There are hundreds of billions of people here. Even if it's only 1,000th of the usual activity, there are still hundreds of millions of people, so we still have to wait. Shin Goblin was very embarrassed about this small traffic jam, so he carefully explained to Luo Fan. Luo Fan just smiled at this. It's just a few seconds. What kind of traffic is this? If he were to apologize just like that, he would probably have to kowtow to apologize if he knew that he was stuck in traffic for hours in the cities on Earth before he transmigrated to this world. His nonchalant attitude made the holy construct admire his magnanimity, and he couldn't help but express his gratitude and praise. Not long after, the cabin brought Luo Fan and Xing Goblin to a huge building. This building was much larger than ordinary buildings. It was many times larger than even those mansions. The entire building looked like a huge ball. Xing Goblin's cabin looked like a ping-pong ball in front of a basketball. The difference was huge. "This is the house," Xing Goblin said to Luo Fan. "Then let's go in." Luo Fan smiled slightly. "Okay. Please wait a moment." Shingo couldn't contain his excitement. Then, he controlled the small wooden hut to release a blue light that entered the huge building. The huge building directly opened a door that could accommodate the small wooden house. Through the gate, one could see that there was an extremely vast starry sky inside the huge building. Xing Goblin controlled the cabin to enter the door without hesitation. After entering, he saw a spiral ring in front of him. On the ring, there were many people strolling, talking, or pointing at the bubble-like stars that existed in the universe. The place where the cabin entered was at the bottom of the spiral ring. Chapter 1159. After parking the house, Shingo led Luo Fan to the spiraling ring that spiraled around the entire spherical space. Not long after the two of them set foot here, a man in uniform hurried over and greeted them enthusiastically. "I'm a shopping guide here. My name is Shengguangji. Friend, you're here to choose a house, right? You've definitely made the right choice by choosing here. The types of houses here are definitely the most complete in the surrounding millions of light years. No matter what kind of house you want, friend, you'll definitely be able to find it here." The man was not ugly, but he was not too handsome either. At most, he was pleasing to the eye. The moment he opened his mouth, everyone felt as if they were bathed in a spring breeze, and they naturally let down their guard. Shengguangji obviously knew about Shingo. Hence, he did not greet him, nor did he care about what he did. He just greeted Luo Fan. Shingo was a guide, and his task was just to bring Luo Fan to the place he wanted to go. As long as he reached the destination, Shingo's task would be considered completed. Hence, after the shopping guide came out, Shingo did not say anything. He just followed Luo Fan and watched quietly. He did not say anything, nor did he make any decisions for Luo Fan. Luo Fan was quite satisfied with this. He smiled and said, "I'm very unfamiliar with everything about the Founding Research Institute, and I'm even more unfamiliar with this house. I'm not too sure what kind of houses there are. Why don't you give me a specific introduction first?" Naturally, Luo Fan did not come here because he lacked a house. The fundamental reason he came here was to see the types of houses in the Supreme Divine Land and study whether there was any creativity that he could learn from. Flying all the way from the border of the Supreme Divine Land, Luo Fan had seen all kinds of buildings. The total amount would probably need to be calculated in the trillions before it could be calculated clearly. However, among the buildings he had seen, 80% of them were duplicates. Although there were a lot of houses, there were not many types. Not to mention that it included all the forms of houses that existed in the Supreme Divine Land. Therefore, that was why he was willing to follow the Saint Construct to take a look. Otherwise, if he really wanted a modified house like the one mentioned by the Shingo, he could create it with just a thought. He could even create a house that was thousands of times more mysterious than the one mentioned by the Shingo. Why would he need to come here? Regarding Luo Fan's request, Shengguangji did not find it strange at all. Things like houses were easily calculated with tens of millions of rule points. No matter how wealthy one was, it was impossible for him to not treat it with caution. Do more research. It was only natural to have more experience and more choices. What's your budget? I don't mean to offend you. It's just that there are simply too many types of houses. Knowing your budget, I can quickly allocate the houses you need to choose from, Shengguangji said with a smile. The budget is undecided. From the worst to the best, as long as they were pleasing to the eye. I can accept it, Luo Fan said lightly. The worst and the best? Shengguangji's face stiffened when he heard that. The worst would be around 10 million rule points, while the best would be billions. It was even possible for it to be tens of billions. This difference was simply too huge. He could not help but suspect that Luo Fan did not have any sincerity in buying the house and was purposely here to make fun of them. However, although he had such a thought as a shopping guide, he would not fall out with Lin Fan because of his professionalism. In any case, even if Lin Fan was just making fun of him, it would not be a loss to him. He had eternal life. Even if he was made fun of for a period of time, it would be insignificant compared to his eternal life. If Lin Fan was not lying and really wanted to buy the house, it might even be billions. Tens of billions of houses would be a huge harvest for him. Just the sales commission alone would be enough for him to not have to work for the rest of his life. Under such circumstances, his face stiffened for a moment before returning to normal. He said to Luo Fan, "I see. Friend, please come with me. Let's start with the basic houses." When Luo Fan said that he had not decided on the budget and that he might want the simplest, worst, or the best house, Shingo's expression changed slightly. Shingo had not known Luo Fan for a long time. His understanding of Luo Fan was based on Luo Fan's own words and his own speculations. He was not very sure if Luo Fan was really a tycoon and could really afford to buy a house. He had only brought Luo Fan here because he was looking forward to it. Now that he heard Luo Fan's unreliable answer, he could not help but suspect that he was being cheated. Would he be a pauper? As he thought about it, his expression became uglier and uglier. Suddenly, he felt a little regretful. He regretted bringing this person here without doing a thorough research. If this person had really looked around once and had no intention of buying a house, then although he wouldn't be punished by the real estate agency, it would definitely affect the relationship between him and the real estate agency. In the future, if he brought people here again, the treatment would probably be much worse than before. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Shingo's expression became uglier and uglier. However, since it had already happened, he could only hope that this person who called himself Luo Fan really wanted to buy a house like he thought and was not just fooling around. Shin Guangji led Luo Fan and Shin go up the spiral ring. Soon, many bubble-like things appeared around the ring. Luo Fan glanced at these fist-sized bubbles and knew that they were made of crystal walls. However, compared to things made of crystal walls like houses, the crystal walls used by these bubbles were extremely thin and completely transparent. The crystal walls contained within them were extremely weak, and they released almost all of the space-time within them. Inside the bubble, there was a space that was neither too big nor too small, forming a thin, transparent barrier on the outside. Inside the bubble, there were houses after houses. Obviously, these bubbles were used to store houses. It was a shelf that was specially used to place houses. The houses inside were also real houses, and they were also the goods that were being sold in the real estate sales office. Very good. Luo Fan looked at these bubbles, and such a thought flashed through his mind. The space-time of these bubbles and the crystal walls were in an extremely delicate balance. As long as the slightest bit of power was touched, the bubbles would collapse. As long as there was a little bit of force, these bubbles would naturally collapse and release the houses inside. The compressed space-time of the crystal walls would instantly return to normal and fill in the space of the houses inside the bubbles. No matter where they were placed, even if they were placed in a small space that could only accommodate a bubble, they would still be able to easily accommodate the entire house after the crystal walls were broken. Luo Fan looked over. The interior of this housing agency was as huge as a starry sky, and it was densely packed with such bubbles. With just a glance, Luo Fan could estimate that there were more than 1 trillion of these bubbles. There are actually over 1 trillion houses for sale, and they dare to boast that the types of houses here are the most complete within 1 million light-years. They really do have something to rely on. Luo Fan looked at these bubbles. He could not help but think so. This filtering barrier is not bad. To be able to completely filter out these bubbles and only appear when one is close to the edge, this is a method different from the cultivation civilization. Luo Fan raised his hand and gently touched the invisible barrier in front of him, such a thought flashing through his mind. It was very easy for cultivators to achieve this. They only needed to set up a formation and they would be able to achieve this. However, for a technological civilization to achieve this, it would require countless complex considerations and all sorts of special transformations. It was not that simple. Shin Guangji looked at Luo Fan's actions and the worry in his eyes became even more intense. This kind of distance filtering technology was something that any slightly larger store would have. This person claimed that he wanted to buy houses worth billions or even tens of billions, but he had never seen such a technique before. How could Shin Guangji not suspect that Luo Fan was a scammer? Shin Guangji's worries naturally did not escape Luo Fan's notice. Luo Fan only felt that this kind of suspicion was funny and interesting, but he did not feel offended at all. He would not even think of changing their minds. He would still do things his own way. This was just the entrance of this housing agency. The houses that appeared here were all simple, in other words, low-quality houses. The levels of these houses were about the same as thatched huts, log cabins, and even phone booth. Of course, at this level, they would naturally have all sorts of strange and unique characteristics. Some of the houses were like phone booths. Some were square and looked like phone booths made of wood, while some looked very sci-fi and modern, making people yearn for them at first glance. The same went for log cabins, thatched huts, and the like. There were all kinds of them, and some of them seemed to be quite high-grade. Although Shin Guangji was worried, his professionalism was still there. He didn't slack off and continued to introduce the many houses to Luo Fan. Don't be fooled by this house's simple appearance. Its internal space is 100,000 square meters, and it can be equipped with 300 kinds of landscape. It's really a cost-effective house. And this one, although the space inside is relatively small, only 8,000 square meters, it can be equipped with 3,000 kinds of landscapes. Shin Guangji pointed at the bubbles nearby and kept explaining to Luo Fan. Luo Fan listened to this explanation and combined it with his own observations and senses, gaining a deeper understanding of these houses. Most of the characteristics of these houses were cliché and had nothing to recommend them for. However, there would be one or two flashes of light from time to time, which made Luo Fan feel like he had gained something. He nodded while following Shin Guangji along the spiral ring. His expression was calm and composed, without showing any signs of fuss or disdain. It was as if he didn't know that the houses in front of him weren't valuable enough to make someone go bankrupt, but were just ordinary goods. Both Shin Guangji and Xing Go saw his performance. For a moment, they felt that Luo Fan was unfathomable. The doubts in their hearts seemed to have been dispelled. For a life form that only needed rule points to survive without sleeping, eating, and having no lifespan limit, the concept of time was naturally different from that of ordinary creatures. 3 meals a day. It was no longer necessary. The distinction between day and night became even more blurry. Hence, Shin Guangji explained to Luo Fan for 3 to 4 days. Gradually, they were halfway through the spiral ring, but he still didn't feel impatient. Even though Luo Fan didn't express anything along the way, he didn't say anything. He didn't say anything either. It was the same. For a business that could easily earn hundreds of thousands or millions of rule points, even if it was a waste of time, it was still acceptable to the sales guide. Not to mention 3 to 4 days, even if it was 3 to 4 years, he wouldn't feel impatient. As long as he could close the deal in the end, Shin Guangji would be willing and wouldn't feel impatient. You're just a country bumpkin. Why are you pretending to be a big-tailed wolf here? Just as Luo Fan was quietly listening to Shin Guangji's explanation of the characteristics of this villa-like house, a voice suddenly entered their ears. Luo Fan's heart moved, and he knew that the person who spoke was after him, a customer who had entered this house within the past 4 days. He turned around. He saw 5 people standing not far behind him. Among the 5 people, one of them had a very similar aura to a divine construct, so he was clearly a guide. One of them looked similar to Shin Guangji, so he should be the sales guide. Of the remaining 3, one was a middle-aged man with a fat head and big ears, the other was a woman who appeared to be extremely charming, her clothes revealing more than half of her breasts, and the last one was an old man who had an extremely close connection with the law layer. I didn't expect that there would be such a thing in the Supreme Divine Land. There's actually such a thing. Looking at them, such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The fat middle-aged man was obviously a rich man. The charming woman next to him in revealing clothes was obviously the woman who had a very close relationship with the rich man. The old man behind them had a very close connection with the law layer, so he could definitely mobilize a lot of the law layer's power. He was most likely the rich man's bodyguard. What Luo Fan felt was the relationship between this woman and the rich man. However, it was just a sigh. In any world, in any country, whether it was a planet or a vast country like the Supreme Divine Land, the gap between the rich and the poor was unavoidable. Since there was a gap between the rich and the poor, there would naturally be some people who would sell something and rely on others to survive. Some people would sell their bodies, some people would sell their abilities. After a glance, he smiled faintly, turned his head again, pointed to a pyramid-like building in front, and asked Shin Guangji, "What's so special about that building?" Shin Guangji was slightly startled. He obviously did not expect Luo Fan to ask this at this time. One had to know that most people who were provoked like this, even if they did not retort, they would definitely do something else. Who would be like this person who did not care at all and acted as if he did not hear anything? However, he quickly reacted and hurriedly said, "This building's unique characteristic is that it gathers energy from the universe to replenish its internal energy source. Its internal space is 100,000 kilometers wide and has a recyclable ecosystem. Even if it doesn't need any rule points, it can guarantee to exist for more than 100,000 years. Moreover, there are 30,000 types of landscapes to choose from. You can even combine these landscapes to create a world." Luo Fan nodded inwardly. The pyramid structure was in line with a certain law of the law layer. With such a structure, it could indeed gather the power of law. Luo Fan's disregard for him was simply an insult to the pretentious rich man. Especially at this time, when he wanted to choose a house for his woman as a gift, it was a naked slap to his face. How could the rich man tolerate this? His face instantly turned red. After a while, he said to the old man behind him, "Teach him a lesson." The old man behind him glanced at the rich man and said, "This is not within the scope of my service. I am only ensuring your safety. Becoming a hired thug? That is not my duty." The rich man was even more furious when he heard those words that didn't give him any face. "I am your boss now. How dare you not listen to me? Don't you want to work anymore?" he shouted angrily. The scantily clad woman beside him hurriedly hugged his arm and said gently, "Boss, calm down. The background here is not simple. I am afraid it is not convenient to make a move here. He is also worried about bringing trouble to the boss, so he is not willing to make a move." This woman's voice was so charming that it made Shingo, who was next to Luo Fan, hold his breath, and his breathing became heavier. Even the shopping guide, Shin Guangji, had a rather unnatural expression. Obviously, he was affected by the woman's voice. Chapter 1160. The moment the woman opened her mouth, a strange power naturally appeared in the law layer and attached itself to her body. This power was not energy, nor was it power. Instead, it was almost a preset existence. Please use to visit this site. Visit download txt novel // in other words, under this power, other people would naturally have all kinds of desires for this woman. It was like the natural law of water flowing downwards and the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. This method of using the law layer was extremely obscure and could almost be said to be untraceable. It was precisely because of this that this woman could use this method as she pleased in this supreme divine land where everyone could connect to the law layer. Although the old man behind the woman did not show any signs of being unable to suppress his desire because of the woman's words, his expression changed. After all, that woman was obviously trying to goad him into action. So what if he had a background here? I'm not a pushover either. I don't believe that the backer here will fall out with me over such a small matter. The fat rich man said angrily. As he spoke, he ordered the old man once more, "You don't have to worry about anything. Just make your move. As long as you're willing to make a move, I'll give you 1,000,000 rules points." 1,000,000 law points? The old man's eyes lit up when he heard that. 1,000,000 rule points wasn't a small sum. Compared to other jobs, being a bodyguard in the supreme divine land was much more lucrative. However, no matter how many he had, he was just a bodyguard. His salary was only 1,000,000 rule points a year. Under such circumstances, he would be able to earn a year's worth of income just by making a single move. No matter how arrogant the old man was before, he couldn't help but be tempted. All right. For this 1,000,000 points I can make a move. If it caused any trouble after that, I will not interfere, the old man said indifferently. As he spoke, he didn't step forward. Instead, he raised his hand and slammed it down on Luo Fan. In that instant, the law layer instantly produced an incomparably intense fluctuation. The fluctuations were so obvious and so intense, it even reflected the real universe, directly causing the space in the house to fluctuate. There were even all sorts of strange lightning flashes, as if the surroundings had suddenly become a world of lightning. "Stop!" The two shop assistants turned pale with fright and hurriedly shouted. However, they were only shopping guides. Since the tycoon dared to make a move here, it meant that he wasn't even afraid of the forces behind this house. Why would he care about these two shop assistants stopping him? There was only a ferocious expression on his face as he looked at Luo Fan with eyes filled with pride and excitement. The rich man didn't stop him, so the old man obviously wouldn't stop either. Countless chains made of lightning appeared out of thin air. In an instant, it formed a cage and rapidly shrunk towards Luo Fan. It looked like Luo Fan was about to be locked in the cage. This attack is almost comparable to the attack of a primordial pure yang expert. To be able to do this with the body of an ordinary person, the technology of the supreme divine land is really extraordinary. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. For an ordinary cultivator, such an attack was nothing. It was enough to be fatal, but it posed no threat to him at all. Even if he stood there motionlessly and allowed the attack to affect his body, he wouldn't be hurt in the slightest. However, if he did that, the people present would naturally see that he was extraordinary and would know that he was hiding his amazing strength. This was obviously not what he wanted. Therefore, in the face of such an attack, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. With the help of the nomological system of the supreme divine land, he directly mobilized the power of the nomological laws. With a slight tremor, the changes caused by the old man's mobilization were instantly eliminated. The nomological system instantly calmed down. As the nomological system calmed down again, the various phenomena created by the old man disappeared. The lightning world and the lightning chain cage all disappeared without a trace, as if they were just illusions that had appeared earlier. The rich man, the woman, the old man, the two shop assistants, and even the divine construct were all dumbfounded. They couldn't react for a moment. What's going on? Why isn't my power working? The old man was stunned for a while. His eyes were bloodshot and his face was extremely pale. He waved his hand and tried to mobilize the power of the nomological system to deal with Luo Fan. However, no matter how he tried, the nomological system seemed to be locked in place and wouldn't budge at all. He couldn't exert any power at all, and his waving hands looked extremely comical. "I'm in a very bad mood because of you. Why don't you help me pay for the house I'm buying later?" Luo Fan didn't care about the old man, as he said to the fat rich man. Originally, he had wanted to obtain any number of nomological points he wanted with just a thought. Hence, the number of nomological points didn't mean much to him. However, he completely dispelled the idea of accumulating nomological points to make the rich man, who wanted to teach him a lesson, bleed a little. The rich man stood there in a daze. His body trembled when he heard Luo Fan's words. His eyes flashed with intense anger, and he opened his mouth to curse. At that moment, the woman beside him quickly grabbed him and whispered, "Boss, it must have been this boss who attacked just now. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him." The fat rich man's body trembled again when he heard this, and his eyes flashed with deep fear. Then, he forced an ugly smile and said, "I was in the wrong just now. It's only right for me to buy a house as an apology. Please feel free to choose, friend." "Hee, thank you very much." Luo Fan smiled and said to Xinguangji, "Let's go see the most expensive house here first. I'll see if I want to buy anything else after I'm done." He didn't hide his intention to make the rich man bleed at all, and the people around him were dumbfounded. When he heard Luo Fan say that he wanted the most expensive house, the rich man's muscles trembled, and he looked like he was about to cry. The cheapest house sold here was around 10 million rule points, while the most expensive house was worth around 10 million rule points. The most expensive house even reached tens of billions. This number, even for him, was a number that hurt his bones. How could he not feel heartache? Under such heartache, he almost couldn't help but want to fight to the death with Luo Fan. He even stood up straight. His eyes were glowing fiercely. However, when he raised his head and saw Luo Fan's faint smile and calm expression, the courage he had just mustered in his heart melted like snow under the sun, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. He could only say, "It should be the most expensive, it should be the most expensive." As he said that, his clothes were almost drenched in cold sweat. At this moment, he regretted having a conflict with Luo Fan, and he regretted coming here to buy a house for his lover. When he saw the woman beside him, he realized that he was so infatuated with her that he had forgotten everything. He couldn't help but pull his hand out of the woman's chest and push her away. His face suddenly became so ugly that he couldn't help but pull his hand out of the woman's chest and push her away. Although the woman was a little afraid of Luo Fan extorting the rich man, she didn't care too much. After all, she wasn't the one being extorted. As long as the rich man still doted on her, she would still be able to live a luxurious life. She would still be able to live a life that wasn't much different from before. However, at this moment, the rich man suddenly pushed her away in disgust. She felt that something was wrong, and an indescribable panic surged in her heart. "Boss!" she called out coquettishly. Her voice sounded like she was crying and complaining, and even iron men would melt if they heard it. However, when she said that, she was shocked. That was because she realized that her voice, it was no longer that enchanting voice from before, and it had become an ordinary woman's voice. Perhaps it was much more attractive than ordinary women, but there was already a qualitative difference from before. How could this be? She was terrified. She suddenly remembered how the bodyguard's attack was stopped, and despair surged in her heart. She looked at Luo Fan with an indescribable fear in her eyes. "Yes. Friend, this way please." Xinguangji's voice was a little absent-minded. The most expensive one was tens of billions, 6% commission. "I'm rich," these words kept echoing in his mind and mind. At this moment, Xingo's mind was also echoing with similar words. Xinguangji could get 6% commission, and although he didn't get that much, he could still get 5%. If it was tens of billions, even 1% would be hundreds of millions. 5% would be more than 1 billion. Such a huge number was simply unimaginable. At this moment, he was glad that he made the decision to be Luo Fan's guide a few days ago. After I get the commission, I will immediately apply to join the Pioneer Research Institute. That way, I won't be afraid of any revenge. This idea appeared in Shingo's mind after a lot of shock. He stealthily glanced at the rich man and found that although he had a submissive posture, his eyes were constantly flashing with an ominous glint. Occasionally, he would sweep his gaze over everyone present except Luo Fan. He knew that if he didn't have any backing after this, then what awaited him would certainly be an unspeakable fate. Shenguangji triggered the law layer and triggered the special function of this house. In an instant, the law layer trembled slightly, and the surrounding space and time changed. In the blink of an eye, everyone present had arrived at the top of the spherical space, which was also the highest point of the spiral ring, which was far away from the lowest point. Obviously, since Luo Fan directly said that he wanted to buy the most expensive house, the shopping guide didn't dare to let Luo Fan walk slowly, so he directly led them through the void and directly arrived at their destination. The ones below are the best ones in our real estate agency. Look, friend, this is called the Temple of the Gods. It is no longer just a house, but a palace, a fortress. The space inside is infinitely vast, and it contains 300,000 kinds of landscapes that we have researched. These landscapes can even break away from illusions and can manifest real world. Although it can't create life, it can simulate it. It also possessed unimaginable combat power. Even if it wanted to destroy an entire galaxy, it wouldn't be a difficult task. For such a house, words can't describe it. Words are already powerless to describe it. Only by experiencing it personally can one truly understand its wonders. Shenguangji was a little excited as he pointed at one of the bubbles floating nearby with longing in his eyes. Inside the bubble he was referring to was a magnificent palace. The palace was sacred and majestic. At first glance, people would naturally feel that the palace was incomparably grand. How much is it? Luo Fan nodded. The characteristics of this house were already very similar to a real heavenly abode magic treasure. It was quite extraordinary to be able to reach this step in the direction of scientific and technological civilization. Even he felt as if his horizons had been broadened. It only costs 80 billion rule points. Shenguangji's voice was trembling. The person who said this had a trembling voice. It was the rich man who wanted to pay the money. He almost fell to the ground. His face turned pale, and his body seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. 80 billion. 80 billion. My entire net worth doesn't even reach 90 billion. He muttered, almost turning into Madame Xianglin. Not a bad house. What about the others? The prices should be about the same. Luo Fan naturally didn't care about the rich man as he chuckled. The prices are all 80 billion. It's just that their characteristics are different. For example, this one is called the Divine Night Palace. It has infinite space inside, and it has also fused 300,000 types of sceneries. It also has the magical effect of turning illusions into reality and materializing a real world. The only difference was that the Divine Night Palace could freeze time and space. Wherever it was, it would form its own space. It can isolate everything inside and outside. Compared to the Temple of Gods, it focuses more on defense. Shenguangji explained. The Divine Night Palace looks not bad either. What about the next one? Luo Fan smiled. Shenguangji's patience was many times better than when he was strolling around. His enthusiasm was beyond imagination. No matter what Luo Fan asked, he would give a detailed explanation. Even if Luo Fan didn't ask, he would try his best to explain. Through such explanations, Luo Fan gradually understood what a real top-notch house was like. The common characteristic of every top-notch house was that it had infinite space. By fusing 300,000 types of sceneries, this research institute could simulate a real world. It wasn't like the previous sceneries that were just illusions. Other than that, different houses were different. Some houses had super strong combat abilities, like the Temple of Gods. Some houses had super strong defense, like the Divine Night Palace. Some houses had an incredible ability to absorb energy, but their defense and attack weren't strong. Some houses had all of them, but they weren't at the peak. Some houses could even be invisible and not be detected by any means. However, they were lacking in attack, defense, and energy gathering. There were so many different kinds of houses that it was dazzling to look at. There were so many choices. If it was an ordinary person who wanted to buy a house, it would definitely be very difficult to choose which one to choose. But for Luo Fan, as long as he saw it, as long as he sensed it, and as long as he knew its functions, he would be able to absorb its creativity and copy it at will. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no need for him to worry about choosing. He casually chose the Temple of the Gods that was first introduced and asked the rich man to pay for it. Under Luo Fan's tyranny, the rich man did not dare to resist. Although his heart was filled with hatred, and his mind was filled with countless schemes for revenge, he could only follow Shen Guangji to pay the 80 billion law points as if his parents had died. Of course, only the old bodyguard accompanied him. The woman wasn't there. Unless you can escape far enough before I can react, I suggest you don't even think about escaping. Luo Fan didn't even look at the tycoon. He just played with the bubble in his hand and carefully observed the Temple of Gods in the bubble. The tycoon's body trembled and a trace of panic flashed in his eyes. He didn't answer. He carefully flew out of the ring with Shen Guangji and entered another space behind the huge spherical space. Luo Fan already knew about the existence of that space. Just like ordinary shops, only the outer space was open to the public. The warehouse and other staff offices were definitely not open to the public. It was obviously the same for the shops in the Supreme Divine Land. However, compared to ordinary shops, the shops in the Supreme Divine Land were much more generous. They directly opened up a space for the staff to work in. In that space there were many rooms. Some of these rooms were where the staff were working, while others were used to store many rooms wrapped in bubbles. Obviously, they were warehouses. After entering, the tycoon immediately asked his bodyguard, "What are our chances of escaping now?" "I'm afraid we don't have a chance," the old man said helplessly. "Why? We're already out of his sight. Can't we escape?" At that moment, he had completely forgotten about the woman who had wanted to buy a house for him. For the sake of his own life, what were the other women worth? My power is still being suppressed and I can't mobilize it at all. This means that we are still in his grasp. How can we escape? The old man sighed. Chapter 1161. 80 billion. When the tycoon drove his luxurious car away from the house, he was already pounding his chest and stamping his feet in pain. Net ordinary people could only condense 10 rule points a day, and he had only used up half of them. Even if some people had a closer connection with the law layer and could condense more rule points than ordinary people, it was still coarse compared to people of the same level. From this, one could see how precious rule points were. Under such circumstances, 80 billion rule points was almost an astronomical figure. For the tycoon, it was as much as 80% or 80% of his family's wealth. If it wasn't for some fixed assets that allowed him to maintain a high quality of life, he might have committed suicide by now. It's all your fault. If it wasn't for you, why would I provoke that malefic star? The tycoon was furious. He kicked the scantily dressed woman away and cursed. "Boss, how can you blame me for this? That person didn't look like an expert at all. How would I know that he would be so strong?" the woman said in horror. As he spoke, he once again triggered the law layer, adding some kind of seductive setting to his voice, which made the tycoon's face look slightly better. Clearly, after leaving the housing market, the seal that Luo Fan had placed on their connection with the law layer had completely disappeared. Everyone's strength had already been completely restored. The tycoon had lost 80 billion rule points. Of course, he wouldn't give up just because of a few tempting words from the woman. However, the woman's tempting words still had an effect. The tycoon's anger was directed to the other side, to his bodyguard. You usually brag so much, but you actually blackmailed me for $1 million. You're actually so useless. That person didn't even make a move and was completely subdued. Trash. If you were half as powerful as you usually brag, why would I need to lose 80 billion rule points? This was what the tycoon thought. As he thought about it, he said angrily, Trash, you're fired. Now, right now, get lost. The old man's ability was that of an arrogant person. With such a close connection with the law layer, he was naturally very powerful. He usually thought highly of himself and looked down on the tycoon. If it wasn't for the rules, how could he become this rich man's bodyguard? Now, this rich man not only caused him to encounter an enemy he couldn't fight against, but he also dared to humiliate him. How could he tolerate this? He laughed coldly and said, You still owe me a year's salary, and the 1 million yuan from before. Let's settle the law points first. I naturally can't be bothered to stay here any longer. You actually dare to ask me for some rules. The rich man's eyes widened in anger. To him, he had lost 80 billion. The root cause was that the bodyguard was not good enough. Now, not only could this person not deal with his opponent, he even had the face to ask for money. This was simply shameless to the extreme. At that moment, he couldn't help but summon his many bodyguards. In an instant, more than a dozen burly men glared at the old man. His body communicated with the law layer, and began to prepare his own terrifying attack, intending to tear this old man to pieces at any moment. This tycoon had a net worth of tens of billions. Of course, it was impossible for him to have only one bodyguard. The reason why he only brought this old man into the house was because this old man was the strongest, and there were too many people, so it was inconvenient to enter the house. Now, the old man was about to rebel. Why would he be polite to him? Humph, do you think these pieces of trash can deal with me? The old man laughed coldly. Kill him! The rich man was furious and shouted. When the surrounding burly men heard the rich man's words, they naturally wouldn't be polite. They all made their moves. Some shot out flames with laws of laws, while others shot out ice with laws of laws. Some of them even sent out all kinds of extremely hard sharp blades, which poured towards the old man. Because these attacks were imbued with laws of laws, they were extremely powerful. It wasn't something an ordinary cultivator could unleash. In the face of such an attack, the old man merely sneered. He reached out and grabbed at the burly men. In an instant, the law layer shook violently. At least, the corresponding law layer at this location shook violently. As the shaking shook, a world of lightning seemed to appear inside the mansion. Everyone present seemed to have fallen into this world. The old man here was like a god of creation. He was towering and possessed an inconceivable and shocking characteristic. Then, a huge hand made of lightning appeared out of thin air and grabbed at the burly men. When the attacks of the burly men collided with the huge hand of lightning, they only stirred up some ripples. They couldn't shake the hand at all. They couldn't even slow it down. In an instant, all the burly men were caught by the huge hand. Miserable howls continuously rang out from the mouths of these burly men. In that instant, every single one of them felt as if their connection with the laws and laws had been covered by a thin veil, becoming blurry and indistinct. It was impossible for them to mobilize the power of the laws and laws to fight their enemies. The old man casually pinched his hand, and all the burly men fainted and fell to the ground. After casually tossing the burly men aside, the old man quietly looked at the rich man and the scantily clad woman who was hugging the rich man in tears. You dare betray your employer? You're courting death. If news of you betraying your employer were to spread, who would dare to hire you in the future? You're cutting off your own path. The rich man shouted in a threatening manner. Betray my employer? I'm just asking for my reward. No matter where you go, such a request is reasonable. I don't think this will affect my reputation. The old man approached the rich man step by step and said coldly, Mr. Shintuan, I think we can still negotiate. I lost my composure because I lost a few billion law points previously. I hope Mr. Shintuan can forgive me. I feel that we've been working together happily all these years. Why don't we forget everything and start afresh? As the old man approached, the rich man kept retreating. His expression became more and more panicked and fearful. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and said reluctantly, Start afresh? Continue working together? You might want to, but I don't. Now, immediately settle the law points you owe me and we'll go our separate ways. The old man, who was also known as Shintuan's bodyguard, said indifferently, Yes. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. This rich man had already taken out a few billion previously. What was a few million now? Seeing that he couldn't persuade him, he could only agree. Seeing that he agreed, Shintuan nodded. He slowly retracted the energy from the law layer, and the surroundings returned to normal. After witnessing such a terrifying scene, the rich man was extremely well behaved. He took out his law points card and directly transferred 2 million law points to Shintuan's account through the Supreme Divine Lands Law Bank. After receiving the law points, Shintuan laughed in disdain. He didn't care about anything else and directly left the mansion that looked like a small world. At the side of the mansion, he found a building that looked like a stone house. He directly left the mansion and hovered in the void. Fortunately, after he left, he didn't dare to stay for even a second. He quickly disappeared into the void. Trash. Shintuan looked at the mansion that looked like a stray dog and cursed in his heart. After cursing, he turned his gaze towards the selling house. His eyes were filled with fear, confusion, and an indescribable excitement. He stopped the house there, motionless, and waited quietly. He had no intention of leaving at all. This was a passageway. Normally, houses couldn't stay here for a long period of time. However, all the citizens of the Supreme Divine Land had an almost eternal lifespan. Under such circumstances, a long period of time here was naturally different from a normal person's. Only a period of 2 to 3 months could be considered long under such circumstances. Even though this passageway was similar to a highway, staying here for a few days was equivalent to staying on a highway on a normal planet for a few minutes. A few days later, a huge door suddenly appeared at the selling house, following which, a small wooden house slowly flew out from the door. Behind this small wooden house, there were a few people who respectfully sent this small wooden house out. Among these people, Shintuan saw an extremely familiar figure. That was the shopping guide who stood beside the man who had easily taken care of her. In an instant, he knew that this small wooden house was what he was waiting for. All of a sudden, he became somewhat excited. However, he didn't do anything. Instead, he carefully watched as the small wooden house passed by him. It shuttled through the research institute unhurriedly, as if it was enjoying the scenery. After half a day, it finally stopped in the void that was specially used to park houses for outsiders. At this time, Shintuan finally mustered up his courage. He drove his house to the small wooden house and carefully emitted a ray of light to connect with the wooden house. The light was emitted for a while, but the small wooden house didn't respond. Just when Shintuan felt that the person in the small wooden house was unwilling to see him, the small wooden house finally responded with a ray of light. Then, the door of the small wooden house opened, and a man appeared at the door. The old man carefully parked the stone house next to the small wooden house and connected with it. Then, he flew out of the stone house and landed in front of the small wooden house, facing the man. The man was Shingo. When he saw the arrogant bodyguard appear, he looked slightly nervous. This person obviously had a conflict with him. Was he here to take revenge? This worry made him feel uneasy, and he couldn't control himself. From the bottom of his heart, he didn't want to open the door to meet this person. However, his employer, the god of fortune who had just helped him earn hundreds of millions of rule points, didn't dare to disobey. He could only open the door and welcome the arrival of the enemy not long ago. Under such circumstances, it was easy to imagine how nervous he was. "Friend, what's the matter?" Shingo asked carefully. "This." Shintuan seemed a little embarrassed. "I wonder if the sage who taught me a lesson is here. I respect Sage very much, and I would like to meet him. I hope you can help me, friend." Sage was the title given to powerhouses in the Supreme Divine Land. Whether it was Shintuan or Shintuan, after learning about Luofan's power, they all addressed Luofan as such. Shingo couldn't help but feel a little confused when he heard this. After a while, the nervous expression on his face disappeared, and it was replaced by a kind of uncontrollable pride. Normally, this person in front of him could cripple him without even making a move. Now, he could only speak carefully in front of him, afraid that he would offend him. This feeling was something that the saint godly body had never experienced before, and it felt like it was floating in the air. Sure. Sage is very busy now, and I don't know if he has time to meet you. However, I can inform him for you. If you want, you can wait here for a while," he said as he picked up his identity card. Shintuan said. Shintuan had never been treated like this before, but the situation was stronger than he was. He could only suppress his displeasure and carefully smile apologetically. Thank you. Shingo grunted and slammed the door in front of Shintuan. Shintuan's face flashed with anger, but he quickly suppressed it. "Go and call him in," Shingo heard Luofan say as soon as he entered the room. At this moment, Luofan was looking through the introduction of all the functions and properties of the houses he had obtained from the house sales office. There were trillions of different types of houses in the real estate market, and the amount of information was beyond imagination. If he listened to the introductions one by one, it would probably take thousands or even tens of thousands of years to finish listening to it. Under such circumstances, when Shin Guangji heard that Luofan wanted to know more about houses, he directly applied to his superior and gave Luofan the detailed information of all the houses for sale. As a big customer who had just traded 80 billion rule points, it was not too much for Luofan to receive such preferential treatment. Of course, although this information was said to be detailed information, however, the key parameters that could allow someone to copy the key information of the house were trade secret. Of course, it was impossible to give it to Luofan. If this information was given to any ordinary person in the Supreme Divine Land, or even any house sales office, it would not be of much use. But for Luofan, this was enough. He only needed to absorb the creativity. Knowing the function of those houses, he could easily build them. He didn't need any more specific parameters to build them. Although building these houses was meaningless to him, although most of them are very ordinary, the occasional flash of inspiration can still make people's eyes light up. It was indeed the right decision to come here this time. Luofan exclaimed in admiration. As he read more about this house, he felt that his attainment in the art of refining treasures had increased by quite a bit. If he wanted to refine a magic treasure or even open up a world, he would no longer have to rely on a few methods like before. Instead, he would have more and more wonderful choices. Shin Tun pays his respects to Sage. At this moment, the old man Shin Tun had already arrived in front of Luofan. He immediately prostrated himself on the ground and paid his respects. Although Luofan looked very young, as a citizen of the Supreme Divine Land, there was no limit to their lifespan. Naturally, they would not estimate one's age based on one's appearance. Some people might look like they were 3 or 4 years old, but they had lived for tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years. Some people might look old and have one foot in the coffin, but they had only lived for a few decades. Under such circumstances, Shen Tun naturally would not feel that it was rude to kneel to Luo Fan just because he looked young. What do you want to do here? Luo Fan asked calmly. Today I realized that I was a frog at the bottom of a well. The power that I was so proud of was simply insignificant. Therefore, I hope that Sage can teach me true power. Shen Tun prostrated himself on the ground. This was the real reason why he had come to see Luo Fan. Previously, he had been like an ant in front of Luo Fan. He had not been able to resist at all. This was the first time in his life that he had felt so powerless. This feeling had dispelled the arrogance that he had accumulated as a genius since he was young. It made him realize how weak he was, and a strong desire to pursue power rose in his heart. Driven by this power, he disregarded the fact that he had previously offended Luo Fan and came forward to ask Na Luo Fan to teach him true power. At this moment, Shen Tun was already prepared to suffer all kinds of humiliation. He had already made up his mind. No matter what happened, no matter how he was humiliated, he would never give up. You want to know what true power is? Luo Fan asked curiously. Yes. Teach me, Sage. As long as I can learn true power, I am willing to do anything that Sage wants me to do. Shen Tun said firmly. I am willing to do anything. I seem to have heard this many times before. Luo Fan smiled. Shen Tun's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. Sage had heard this many times before. Could it be that in the past, many people did not say what they said but could not do it? If that was the case, it would be troublesome. He gritted his teeth and finally made his final decision. He directly took out his law point card and presented it with both hands. This is all the savings that I've accumulated over the past hundreds of thousands of years. Although it's not much, only about 120 million law points, it's all I have. Now, I am willing to give it all to show my sincerity. These rule points are not to buy Sage's knowledge. They are just to express my determination. No matter what Sage wants me to do, I will not hesitate. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Kneeling for sharing fastest update least mistake.